We are going to call this workshop of the Martin County School Board to order. If you would all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Falls, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Roberts? Mrs. Powers?
Here, sorry.
Mrs. Pritchett?
Here.
Mrs. Russell?
Here. Thank you. Please let the record show that Mr. DiTerlizzi is not here today. At this time, we will have open to the public. Citizen input is vital to the improvement of our district. Most times, your remarks may be listened to without comment from the board members or superintendent. This does not mean they are heard with any less intensity or concern. Where appropriate, the superintendent and staff will investigate your comments and report back to you and the board with an answer. We thank you for taking the time and having the concern to make our district better. Your presentation to the board should not exceed 3 minutes. Letters or statements from others not present can be given to our clerk, who will be sure that each school board member and the superintendent receive a copy. To keep our record straight and authentic, our policy does not permit you to read the statements of others into the record. First up, Catherine Rogers.
Good afternoon, Superintendent and board members. Thank you for allowing us to stay at the pool through the next calendar year. I'm concerned about what the rent will be in July. Sailfish Splash has been unable to accommodate the Martin County High School swimming team with the other teams and sports currently practicing there. Our high school swim team is majority made up of female athletes. Title IX gives women athletes the right to equal opportunity in sports, educational institutions that receive federal funds. We need this Martin County High School pool to include the women athletes that currently swim there, as well as all of the middle school and elementary females that will swim there in the future. I'm here today to ask for assistance from district level administrators about building a community outreach program to bring Martin County School District students to the pool on Saturdays to teach them to swim. In researching what is needed in our area, I learned that many parents are also in need of swimming lessons. Could we work on hosting an event at the pool to talk about safety tips around the water and demonstrate how to be safe in the water? Our country is in need of lifeguards. Could I work with the Career Technical Education Program to bring a lifeguard certification class to Martin County High School? This way we could open the pool up to a high school as a classroom and allow students to become lifeguards that could potentially give them a job in our country. Finally, I would like to schedule monthly meetings with you and Coach Danny Hartley to ensure that the Martin County High School can reach its full potential as a classroom that would promote wellness, safety, and future careers. There is so much potential with the Martin County High School pool. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Audrey Minnis.
Hi, Dr. Main and School Board, thank you very much for giving me the time. I'm here to do a happy dance because you have taken the time to listen to us trying to save our pool. Thank you very, very much. Mrs. Roberts, thank you for responding to my letter. This is the second time I've actually gotten up here and talked, but it is absolutely essential that we keep the pool. It is there, as the swimmer just mentioned, we need it. We absolutely need it. And as you know, an old Red Cross water safety instructor, there are many of us that will volunteer our time to get others trained once we get the Red Cross certification so that we can train others. Anyway, thank you very much for at least considering giving us time to work out the details and being able to save our pool. And set your alarm for 4 o'clock so you can be there at 4:30 tomorrow morning. Danny starts you get 15 minutes to warm up and then he starts his workout at 4:45. So come for the fun. Thank you again for giving us the time to present our case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. John Millay.
Good evening, Board Chair, Superintendent Main, members of the board. Nice to see you in this great facility. I'm here today just because, quite simply, being a proud citizen of Martin County, Florida here, having worked in this school district for many years and all the things that you read in the papers, the school staff, the families, the students just don't get thanked quite enough. And I'm here, I read about the great success from the great plans that were put in place this past several years. I'm just proud of the fruit of the labor, of the hardworking principals, the hardworking families, the students. And when I was thinking about that, I was taking a walk down memory lane, and I was thinking about how just what a treasure it was to be superintendent of the school district and some of the success that we had here. Mainly, I was looking at how we navigated that pandemic. I'm so glad that's behind us. The work we made with the district PTA, I was so proud of the outreach that we had with them. The comprehensive tutoring and the enrichment that we had for our members. The opening of the 2 brand new schools, Palm City parents, Jensen Beach parents. I know you're so proud of the new schools that you have, and South Fork is just coming soon. So proud of that work. I was so proud of how the district rallied around to make sure ESSER dollars and ARP dollars were spent wisely. We added career and technical education courses and more certifications for kids. So proud again of the staff and the decisions that were made on that. Super proud of the focus we did several years ago. We focused on those bottom 25th percentile students and made a huge difference. Kudos, Mr. Main, for the work that you're doing and the work of those principals to keep improving. And I appreciate the school board's work behind that. The work is paying off. I can see with the leadership and development, the Maxwell strengths that I see happening throughout the district. The work through Covey's principles, the 7 habits, I see them in action. It was so nice that looking back and reflecting the work, the conversations with the community members, thankful and grateful for the support of the Chambers of Commerce from Palm City to Hobe Sound and Jupiter to Indiantown and Port Salerno, Stewart Chamber. I don't think they've always gotten thanked enough. Proud of some of the work that's happened to move this district forward on a comprehensive reading and math program was passed. So again, proud of all that, the work that's been done in transportation, the work's been done in accolades on the pools, which still has work to be done, but the sports programs, proud of that as well. Proud of the way the district and the students are reading more with Accelerated Reader. But first and foremost, I just want to share that I'm proud of the hardworking staff, the teachers, the families that make this district great. So thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment. We will now be moving on to our district presentation on Indiantown Bus Compound.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Superintendent Main, and board members. Mr. Harden and I are happy to be here to share a little bit more information and answer any questions and hopefully receive direction from the board concerning the concept of the Indiantown Bus Depot moving forward for the opening of the next school year. So you have before you the idea of the co-location. We spoke about a month or so ago about the co-location of the Indiantown Bus Depot with the Indiantown Adult Education Center. And for anyone not familiar with that location, it is very close to Indiantown Middle School. And the proposal is really to relocate 6 buses that we already own that are at the Stewart Depot down the road, and to move those 6 buses out to Indiantown, which would be at no additional cost to the district. Those are already buses in our fleet. We would look to potentially fill a coordinator of transportation if possible, but certainly would need a safety specialist position to help manage and maintain the Indiantown Depot. And the coordinator really was part of a succession planning that we were talking about, separate and apart from the bus depot. So that obviously is something for discussion as well. We would like to request, if this were to go through, to save pay for the drivers for 1 year for the current Indiantown drivers who remain driving Indiantown routes, because their routes time will change. And so the way bus drivers' salaries are calculated is based upon their time on the bus, their drive time, and their prep time. And we are looking to seal the parking lot. We do have a lot right now that would be used for the buses, and it just needs a little bit of attention in terms of paving and sealing that particular piece of property so that the buses would be safely tucked away in that depot in Indiantown, and to purchase and install a 500-gallon diesel tank above ground and a pump that would be in the former location where the pump used to be when we had a depot in Indiantown prior. So in a nutshell, this is the proposal that we're looking at. And the reason that we have proposed these particular items, right now there are no buses staged or permanently located in Indiantown. So in case of an emergency, we all know that Indiantown is several miles from our current bus depot and is in a more westernly location than the vast majority of our schools. So in an effort to make sure that we have buses available in event of an emergency or breakdown, that's the rationale for having buses out there on a full-time basis. Additionally, the travel time to Indiantown from our bus depot is about 45 minutes. So if we needed to get a bus out there now, it takes approximately that amount of drive time to have a bus reach their destination in Indiantown at either Indiantown Middle or Warfield Elementary. A supervisor and safety expert would be part of this transportation team to ensure the safety, supervision, and having multiple drivers. These people are also CDL license holders, so in the event of an emergency, the 6 buses, however many licensed CDL drivers we have in the depot, would be able to immediately leave that Indiantown location and deploy to the area that needed buses on campus. The drivers who currently have routes in Indiantown have an hour and a half per day added to their route time to account for driving to and from Indiantown. If the drivers were stationed at the Indiantown compound, the schedules would be reduced to the minimum of 6 hours due to the actual drive times. They would be reducing that amount of time driving the bus. It actually also reduces the wear and tear on our buses because they're driving fewer miles per day since they're already in Indiantown. We do know that the Indiantown Adult Education Center has space available. It's in close proximity to the bus parking lot that we spoke about and is also available during evening hours as the bus drivers come back later in the evening after their final route. The only diesel fuel in Indiantown at the moment, other than the gas stations that are out there, is at the fire station, and they have about a 1,000-gallon tank, which they shared is too small to share. If there's an event of an emergency, forest fire, any kind of thing that would happen in Indiantown, the county would need access to the amount of fuel that they have. So that's the reason for us to look to put our own tank and pump there in Indiantown. The 2 local gas stations were approached to assist us with providing diesel fuel out there. They each offered a 5-cent discount per gallon off of their pump prices. But as you know, we do source diesel fuel to provide fuel at the Stewart location. And when we put this together, we paid $3.36 a gallon for our last delivery. And that would be a savings of 76 cents per gallon over the offered reduced price at the regular gas station. So that's the rationale for having our own tanks out there. We would, in just a few miles, a few months, would be able to recover the cost with the cost differential between providing our own fuel at the cost the district is able to source compared to buying it from the vendors in Indiantown. And then, of course, we do have mileage and fuel cost savings. We've given some information about the 3 buses. It's important to note that each of those 3 buses drives 3 routes per day. They have the elementary route, the high school route, and the middle school route. And so you can see there that having a bus depot in Indiantown would provide for approximately 400 fewer miles per day. And over the course of time, that's about 50,000 miles annually. And at the fuel savings, the projected annual fuel costs for those Indiantown bus routes would be about $21,000. And additionally, there could be savings, would be savings in reduced amount of wear and tear on our buses, tires, brake fix, all those kinds of things maintenance that would need to be done on our buses. And so we present this to you with an opportunity to ask questions. We have our resident expert here, Mr. Tom Harden, our Director of Transportation, and we are happy to entertain discussion, comments, questions, and potential direction for the April board meeting if the board is in fact interested in moving forward.
Are there any questions from the board? Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, so when you brought this to us before on February 13th, you were talking about using the portable. Is this still using the portable, or is this a different plan?
After looking at the portable and looking at what it would take to bring it up to usable, we reached out to the Anytown Learning Center, and they had office space available, willing to let us, partner with them at no cost.
So it would not be the portable.
It would not be the portable. We'd be at the Anytown Adult Learning Center, which is right in front
Right,
of us.
yeah. So, so the initial, Mr. Morrison, the initial piece that said something about capital was 72,416, which I don't believe was all capital. Some of that was operating. So I don't know, do we have a new estimate on what besides the fuel tank and the parking lot resurfacing, do we have any other?
Right now, the fuel tank, they gave me an estimate of $5,000 for the pump and the tank, and then for the sealing and resurfacing of the compound parking lot of approximately $15,000. And the only other would be the safety specialist with benefits around $34,000 a year.
Okay. So all of this other bathroom repair, remodel, office furnishings,
That's would not be needed.
computers,
Will not be needed.
supplies, all of that, that all goes away? Okay.
Yeah, the Adult Learning Center has computers, everything we need is there. they-
And then I would assume, Mr. Morrison, that if we were moving forward with this, this would be in the 5-year capital plan, and it would be listed in the ad that we do.
Yes, that would be correct, madam.
Correct. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Ms. Powers?
So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Miller, Mr. Harden, and Superintendent Main for bringing this forward and really prioritizing the safety of the students in Indiantown. It's before Ms. Thelma Waters passed away, this was something that was really near and dear to her. Her daughter wishes that she could be here today. She lives out in Indiantown, and I thank you all, and I thank my fellow board members for supporting it. Thelma was quite a force for children in Indiantown, and this was one of the things when she passed away that she tasked me with, and I'm so happy to be able to deliver it to the students of Indiantown and the families, because they deserve the same level of safety and security as the rest of the county. So thank you all very much.
Ms. Pritchett, do you have anything?
Just that I got to see Thelma's daughter at a recent event, and she was just gleeful that this was even being discussed. So it's going to be nice to, like you said, actually have it come to fruition. Thank you.
So I'm hearing that we would like to move forward. The consensus of the board with this recommendation?
And if I could just ask for clarification, the April official board meeting where action can be taken would include the components of the diesel fuel tank, the sealing of the parking lot, the potential for drivers for save pay, those outlined on slide 2, and then the safety specialist. Is there interest in also the coordinator of transportation that was part of succession planning? What's the pleasure of the board around the staffing component?
Ms. Roberts?
So, I don't know where Carter went. So I haven't seen an updated, oh, there you are. I haven't seen an updated org chart, and I don't know I know that in our budget presentation, we have some staffing pieces in there, so I'm not sure how that's being handled. I guess I'm asking Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Board Member, Superintendent. We would have to update and amend the 24-25 capital plan for the capital pieces that we need to do. And on the staffing piece, the recommendation would be coming through the superintendent for the staffing pieces. As of today, for today's presentation, that is not included because, of course, we did not know whether or not the consensus would be to move forward or not.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm asking the superintendent what his
Mrs. Roberts, I would be prepared to bring the org chart forward with the rest of the reorg recommendations to the board at the May meeting. I think it needs to be included as a total package at the next meeting with all the org chart recommendations and recommendations for reorg to be included in my ask of the board.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have clear direction. I appreciate that. And then just wanted to let the board know we have not forgotten the additional ask of considering staging of buses in additional locations. So this is something that if board members have additional comments, feedback, thoughts, I have reached out to our partners in safety and security, risk management, and we've been looking at that as well. And in addition, we are also prioritizing the look for property on the west side of the tracks, because right now our buses have to cross multiple times a day, and Tom can tell you how many times a day. Our buses cross that becoming very busy railroad crossing. So we are looking for the potential of property that would be able to move the bus depot.
Go ahead, Ms. Powers?
So I appreciate that, and I think that we should continue the long-term look at how we stage our buses for safety reasons. But I also think this might be a really great topic of conversation at our joint meeting with the city and the county to talk about if we do need to do something, given Brightline and the trains and all the new things that we're dealing with traffic, if we would have that as a topic of conversation. Maybe there are shared properties that we could co-locate to save those dollars instead of trying to build a whole new compound of our own, but also share our compound if we're moving some of our buses from the property that we currently own and reciprocate that way. So that could be an option as well.
Thank you. I have that written down for the joint meeting. Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, so that's where I was going with that, is I think that it should be discussed at the joint meeting, and I didn't want anybody, including the public, to get any idea that we're running out looking to buy acres of property to park buses on, so, thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Pritchett, do you have anything? Thank you. All right.
Okay,
Thank you
very
so much. Our next presentation is an investment policy update. Mr. Morrison, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members, superintendent, members of the public. With us today is Mr. Richard Pengelly. He is the Managing Director of PFM, Public Finance Asset Management, and he will be taking you today through his presentation regarding the investment policy and the recommendations for its update. Thank you. I turn it over to Richard.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, board. So as Carter said, I will be walking you through a review that we have done of the school board's investment policy. So the review included a couple things. One was reviewing against some standard frameworks that govern policies for school districts in Florida and local governments nationally. The second was looking at what the landscape looks like for investors like you all as a Florida local government and as a school district. And then last was sort of just some cleanup items in the policy and seeing if there's anything that we may want to simplify or clarify. When we're reviewing policies, there's three frameworks that we look at. First and foremost, Florida Statutes 218-415 specifies what a local government needs to have in an investment policy. So the first thing that we do is we go through and check and make sure that the policy is in line with any changes that may have occurred to the statutes. For the most part, from year to year, you don't see too many changes in the statutes. However, we did have a change in the past year, so that was something that we'll sort of touch on here. The second framework that we apply is we look at the Association of Public Treasurers of the U.S. and Canada's model policy framework. This is an organization, it's made up of local governments all across the country, and they have a little bit more robust framework for looking at local government investment policies. So we look at that secondly. And then the last thing is to look at the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, and look at their best practices for local government investment policies. And we kind of go through in a checklist format, which I'll sort of show here in a second on each of these. So no surprise, school district's policy actually met all of the requirements under 218-415, which is what we would have expected. We did make some small tweaks to the language in a couple sections, and that's what's highlighted there. We also highlighted the listing of authorized investments. We are going to make some recommendations for adding some new sectors to the policy, so that's why that one was highlighted. But just on its face, with no changes, the policy meets the requirements of 218-415. There was a change. The legislature put in place a set of different new laws. It's been referred to as HB3 from last year. And as it relates to 218-415, there is a new section that was added. It doesn't create a requirement to be added into the policy, but it does say and specify that investment decision-making must be based on pecuniary factors. The law also describes and defines what pecuniary factors are, which generally means that it's just taking into account, financial factors without sort of having ideological factors being brought into it. Specifically, within the investment industry, there was a method of investing or a style of investing called ESG, environmental social governance. So this particular requirement would impact the ability to have that kind of or that type of investing in investment policy. Very few local governments in Florida have an ESG type policy governing their excess funds. The school district did not have that in their policy, so it doesn't necessitate making any changes or modifications to the policy. But we did want to highlight that since it was a change in the code, or in the statutes rather. Under APT, USNC, the policy again met pretty much all of the requirements. In the initial drafting of the policy, we used this framework was part of the drafting, so we didn't really expect there'd be much changes. There are some tweaks and updates, again, some clarifications, and that's why you do see some highlights on a couple of the points there. And then GFOA best practices. Again, the policy really met all the requirements there, but some of the same recommendations that we're going to give are what are highlighted. For example, we're adding or recommending adding to the list of authorized investments. So the next slide here, we showed a comparison of the existing policy, our recommendations, and then everyone likes to know what their peers are doing. So we show a selection of other school districts and show what the sectors are and allocation limits that they allow, and these are maximum limits. This isn't necessarily what's actually being used in their portfolios for comparison. And we highlighted a group of sectors that are being used in other school district policies and are being used by other local governments that are other high-quality sectors that we think can be added to the school district's policy. And really, it's adding credit. It's adding credit sectors in. What do we mean by that? Essentially, anything that's not a government type of obligation, a government type investment, whether it's treasuries or agencies, If you're investing in something like a corporate or even maybe a municipal debt, like the debt that you would issue, that is what we call credit, meaning that you have to do a little more work in understanding, the type of credit that you're taking on. These are other high-quality sectors that are used in other local governments in Florida. The specifications that we've written into your policy require them to be, investment grade. Investment grade goes from AAA, AA, single A to triple B. Our requirements would have it be A or better, so you're, kind of in a higher, a little bit higher tier within the investment grade sector. We would use these investments to add some yield to the portfolio, but also to create more diversification in the portfolio. And I'll kind of give you an example why we might want to do that. After the global financial crisis, 08, 09, the government agencies, which is one of the sectors that's in your policy, were mandated to wind down their retained portfolios, and so they've been issuing a lot less debt. Before the financial crisis, high-quality portfolios like yours really had a lot of agency securities, and now it's much harder to really source those. It's been much harder for, more than a decade to source those. And so we, started looking at using high-quality corporates as an offset to that so that we could diversify portfolios and add a little more yield to the portfolios. So again, taken together, we're recommending adding allocations and allowing for those to be added into the portfolio. If you do implement this policy, then we would come back with in-depth liquidity analysis, and then we'd make recommendations for how to actually implement these sectors in the portfolio as the next step. And that's a process that we've gone through in the past to structure the portfolio and decide how we're going to allocate funds to it. So the next couple slides go into a little more detail. I'll end here. As I said at the beginning, generally the recommendations after going through kind of the checklist, looking at the landscape and where the district's current portfolio is, we think the new policy expands the envelope to invest in a more diversified portfolio. And if the policy was implemented, we would then come back and look to take advantage of those. So I'll pause there for questions.
Are there any questions from the board? Anyone down here? Okay, Ms. Roberts, go ahead.
So I have a couple comments.
Sure.
So my first, I know that you're expanding our window to 5.5 years. Is there anything to prevent us from expanding to 7 years? Because I know that, just to pick up more yield, I know that yield is down. We're in the 2 to 3 year period now, but as that expands, is there anything by law that is preventing us to go to 7? That's
No,
question number one.
Absolutely not. And it's really just more convention. I would say most school districts that are using anything beyond just a local government pool or their bank accounts probably use a 1 to 3 type benchmark, which is your current benchmark. Some school districts for their self-insurance funds, I'm thinking maybe Broward School as an example, also has a 1 to 5, so they actually have 2 benchmarks that they use. I can't think of anyone that goes out to that maturity on their operating funds, but there's nothing that would stop you from doing that.
And I'm just thinking, for the board members' edification, there's nothing when we buy a 7-year that says we need to hold it for the 7 years. Obviously, we can sell it any time in between.
Absolutely, yes.
But if you can pick up some yield by going to 7, I think that that's something that we should look at. That was comment number 1. I don't know how everybody thinks about that. But comment number 2 is, I see that in commercial paper, I know that, and it kind of, I guess I didn't really notice. I know that it's 270 days, which is the norm, but there is commercial paper that pushes itself with the higher thresholds of review that pushes itself out to the 1-year mark, the
Yes.
364-day paper. So I would be interested in changing the requirement that you have on whatever page it is, that's defining the commercial paper as a limit of 270 days to define it as the 1-year period, just so that we would have the flexibility to do that. That was number 2.
Okay, yep.
Number 3 is in talking about your actual percentage pieces. I appreciate that you have the safeguards put in as far as rating changes go, as far as the diversity parameters, as far as your sector limitations. But quite frankly, I am more interested in changing both the commercial paper and the Florida Prime up from 25% up to 50%,
Okay.
just to be able to get some additional yield out of that. And the same thing with corporate bonds. I would be interested in, since we're adding that, is to add that. You already have a sector limitation on that to begin with. So I think with the sector limitation on that, if we could get something that was higher than that, I would be interested in moving that up to, say, like 50%, which Brevard and Broward both have. I mean, I think if we did those. So that was my 3 pieces. And then my other comment was about the agency mortgage-backed securities. So I know that when you're defining those, you're talking about an average maturity instead of an overall maturity. And those kind of make me a little bit nervous, because obviously mortgages are typically going on for a longer time period than whether it's 5 years or 7 years. And when you're using an average period, that kind of, I feel like there's too much volatility there. I know right now, as far as agency mortgage-backed securities, we have 0%. I would prefer to keep it at 0%, just because I think that that's, and I'm asking you in your professional opinion as to the volatility with those, because as you see the prime interest rate or something change, those are the ones that you see the huge fluctuations with, and I wouldn't want to be in a position, from my perspective, of when we're having to liquidate something to get our hands on cash, that we're looking at that as, you know, we've got a loss on that, we're waiting for interest rates. So I'm interested in what you think about that piece.
Well, my comment would be that 50% corporates is where we'd want you to be. Especially with that change, that's probably going to be have more of an impact on the portfolio than a 20 or 25% allocation to the MBS. Others have expressed sort of concerns about the volatility. They are very interest rate sensitive instruments. Something with a 3-year average life, as you kind of noted, might have a 10, 15-year final maturity. We wouldn't expect it to extend out, that long, given just the general nature of how folks pay mortgages and how those pools work. But completely understand sort of that, that concern. I think the biggest, benefit is really coming from taking on credit exposure where you have definitive duration and maturity limits. So that's a good suggestion, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so my concern is, I know that, I realize if I'm looking at a bundle of mortgage-backed securities, I've got maturities all over the place. But my concern is that when an interest rate goes up, that some of those are getting hit really hard, and you see a lot of volatility in that instrument itself that you wouldn't see somewhere else. Because they're not looking at, other people who are looking at the market value of those, if you're looking at a market value of something else that's 5 or 7 years, you know that if you wait a couple years, you're now down into really short term. But with those, you're really not. You're really kind of extended out there.
No,
so.
it is. And, their monthly pay structures compared to a semi-annual pay structure from a corporate bond or something like that. So that's attractive when, you're, kind of in a stable or declining rate environment, but you're exactly right. They're very interest rate sensitive, and in a rising rate environment, especially a rapidly rising interest rate environment, which we just went through, you could see that duration move out in the portfolios. We tend not to carry a big amount of them in the portfolio, which means that they have not quite as much impact. And like I said, if you're willing to go up on the credit allocations, I see no reason why leaving the MBS out wouldn't be, fine.
So I ask my fellow board members what you all think.
Ms. Pritchett?
Can you identify any risks or disadvantages to extending it out to 7 years and the 364-day? I just want to know if there's any risk to the district in doing that.
So on the, allowing longer maturities in the portfolio will allow us to put higher yield instruments. But the overall interest rate risk of the portfolio is capped at 3 years. So that is the kind of the overall risk measurement of the portfolio. That would remain in place. It would just mean that, as we're looking to buy treasury securities or agency securities or corporates, we could go a little further out. In the current yield environment, that may not help you quite as much, but in a typically upward sloping yield environment where shorter term rates are lower than longer term rates, it can be particularly beneficial. As we move through the course of the year, this year, it could be beneficial in that it could also allow you to lock in more of this interest rate environment for the future when we potentially go lower. The Fed right now is once it gets ready, going to try and drive interest rates back down to something like 2 or 3%, right? That's what they're forecasted and projected and where they think interest rates should be, which is, 2 or 3% lower from where interest rates are now. So you would have the benefit of having these, better yields locked into portions of your portfolio. But it is more risk, so there's more sensitivity on those instruments to rising interest rates. But again, since the overall portfolio limit is going to be capped at 3%, and depending on the benchmark that we put in, that would really drive kind of the overall sensitivity of the portfolio.
Ms. Powers, do you have anything?
No, I was just going to say, thank you for all your comments, Ms. Roberts. Before I would want to have any sort of consensus, I would like you all to digest it and bring it back to us with the recommendations and the comments that Ms. Roberts made, and if that is tolerable risk for us to take, then, I'm okay. But I want to be sure that that's the recommendation of the professionals and that we're getting all the best information and giving you time to put that together for us.
Yeah, so we'll incorporate those modifications in the policy, but as I kind of stated here, and as you can see from the kind of the table showing where you are with the other sort of school districts, we're very comfortable with all of those recommendations.
So does everyone want them to go back and get everything and then bring it back to us? Are you good with that?
So will come back to us as an action item at the next meeting, or are we good with that? Is that the plan? I just didn't know if this was a time sensitive, something that we need to take action on. Okay. So however much time.
So we'll bring it back forward.
So,
Let's shoot for May, if that's.
so you don't think so your yield horizon or your interest rate calculations aren't making it time sensitive at all?
Well,
I find that.
the more you've sort of delayed and waited this year, the better it's gotten, right?
Yeah.
So, we started the year, the market was absolutely certain we'd have a recession at the end of the year, that yields would be down, 1.5%. And here we are, the probability of the first rate cut happening in June has gone from 70% to more like 55%. Some folks are saying maybe rates will just stay the same. Maybe we even see, something go up from here. So
I'm just seeing the 3-year rates. I mean, I'm just seeing 3-year maturities eroding. I mean, I don't know whether you're seeing that or not, but.
no, well, I guess, I don't know where the 3-year is today, but I know the 2-year has been up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison, if you are ready for the budget workshop, you can proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Superintendent, members of the public. Before I get started, just a few minor corrections to your hard copy, if you may have one before you. Today is budget workshop number 2, as opposed to number 3 that was published on the cover page. And on page 3 that we talk about the budget process, it's really the 24-25 budget process as opposed to the 23-24. That got missed in review. So to take us through today's budget workshop, we'll talk a little bit about the budget development cycle, 24-25 FTE projections. We'll talk about the legislative session that just ended and walk you through the agenda regarding some ARP positions. We've done some preliminary work on them. At the February 13th workshop, we talked about the impact fees and also property insurance renewal. We have had a meeting of the SCREM board and kind of give you of kind of where we are at this point in time. And then I will turn it over to Dr. Adrian to discuss and have some dialogue with the board with respect to district-wide printing. So presently on your screen, the red arrow is where we are in the budget cycle. We're having, obviously, school board budget workshops discussing various issues for the next year's budget. Then the next step will be discretionary and categorical funds will be allocated to the schools based on their projected FTEs for next year. And then you can see the cycle then sort of begins on July 1. The legislative session, as I mentioned, ended on March 8th. We received an update from Mr. Black. 1,957 bills were filed, 2,196 amendments filed, 3,051 votes taken, and busy session with 325 bills passed, and we ended up with a $28.4 billion FEFP budget. Presently on your screen is just a screenshot of the 24-25 FTE projection that we submitted to the state. In the orange rectangle, we showed the FES, or commonly known as the vouchers. We combined the traditional with the virtual, and charters are in blue that we circled. In this model, we picked as model number 1, as model number 1 has the tendency to give us the highest of the vouchers or scholarships. On the next slide, slide number 6, again, as we're tracking our surveys from February 2021 through October of 2023 with your actuals and looking at your projections for 24-25, we will break that down for you on the next couple of slides, what that means in terms of monies. Pretty much for the traditional, it shows pretty much flat funding or a small loss. Charters at 1625 do show some growth. And then scholarships, of course, you can see the 618.5 or a 10% increase in the in scholarships. Looking at the final legislative conference report that came out on March the 5th as a result of the legislative session, when we're looking at the 2023 third calculation, and I just want to pause there for a moment. As is customary, you will see this third FEFP calculation being compared to the conference report, but when we get to July and the property appraiser certifies what the tax roll will be, then they will switch to the February count, which is the fourth FEFP calculation. So the numbers will vary when we bring that back. But for right now, I also wanted to point out that in the 24-25 line, the unweighted FTE is at 19,731, whereas before on slide 6 I showed you 19,753. That will be also adjusted once we get to the fourth FEFP calculation, once they infuse into the budget the district's projection in its whole entirety. So comparing year over year, we always show you these big numbers, which is looking at your 23-24 third calculation, your October count of students. The FEFP district required local effort tax was $108.9 million. For 24-25 is $113.9 million, or $4.9 million in increase. Your .748 discretionary tax is at $25.5 million this year, as opposed to $26.8 million next year, or an increase of $1.3 million. So local revenue in the budget has gone up by approximately almost $6.3 million, whereas state revenues have remained pretty much flat funded from $28.1 million in the current fiscal year to next year. This is the second year in a row that we've seen that shift in state policy, where state dollars have been pretty much decreased and local dollars have increased. Now, what that does, if I can pause for a moment, is that in terms of our cash flow, when we look at getting our state dollars, we get 1/12 of that pretty much for the entire year. If the state then reduces our cash flow coming in from the FEFP, and we're relying more on our local dollars, which we do not get till November, then we're currently doing an analysis in-house to make sure we can cover our expenses through when we get our cash in November. So I will come back to you to determine whether or not we would have to issue a tax anticipation note, not because of mismanagement of funds, but simply because of the timing of when we get our monies from the state versus when we get our monies from the tax collection in November. So when you look at the split, total local revenue percentage is about 83%, whereas state revenues, at least for Martin County School District, is around 17%. And dollars per unweighted FTE is $8,562, and dollars per weighted FTE have increased about $35 at $7,624. Moving on to slide 9. As I mentioned, we see these big numbers, but I'm going to break down for you and show you how a $6 million increase could probably actually be a $1 million decrease. So when you take the total funding increase from the previous slide of $6.2 million, we then have to deduct the charter school pro rata share. Now, what we have done is we've taken what we call the charter school revenue estimating worksheet, which pretty much is the holy grail for charter school in estimating how much they earn in FTE on a pro rata basis. So we take their projections and we run it through this formula. So in the current year, we're looking at $15.9 million going to about $16.6 million for the charter schools for their share. Of course, we have some prior year adjustments, which are immaterial at about $86,000. And then the family empowerment scholarships in the budget go from $13.9 million to approximately $18.6 million in the conference report, or an increase of about $4.7 million. Now, in my conversations with the FDOE, what they're saying is that in particular this year we were affected by the change in the policy of the state, where they removed the income caps from the FES program. So whereas in the prior year, people who may have wanted to take a voucher and go to private school or exercise that option, now they don't have that income limitation anymore. So in the budget, at least, the conference report shows $18.6 million. So I have to deduct that out, because we consider that as a withholding from our funds until those payments are made and reconciled. So right off the top of my $6.2 million increase, I have to take off $5.3, almost $5.4 million just for those items alone, between the charter schools and the family empowerment scholarship. That brings me down to about $918,000. Now, in the 22-23 legislative session, certain categoricals were eliminated out of the budget and then put into the base funding. That then left on the school district the opportunity to decide how much money we were going to spend out of the base funding for certain items. So the teacher salary increases the first line. The current allocation is $6.69 million in 23-24, and for next year is approximately $7.9 million, or an increase of about $1.2 million. If you look on the left side of your screen, you will see a little note that page 21 of 41 of the conference report shows $6.6 million for maintaining prior year increases. So as we've gone on probably 4 years now, if not, yeah, about 4 years now, and we have given those raises, included in the budget is funding to maintain those raises that we've given in the past, over the past years. Then the proviso language then requires us to provide an additional 1.07%, or that 1.272 million for current teacher raises going into next year. And if I may editorialize a little bit, we would want to start negotiating with our MCA union as soon as possible so we can get those funds negotiated prior to the October deadline, so our superintendent does not have to go to Tallahassee and explain why we have not reached an agreement as yet. The second item I highlighted in yellow because we're asking this year for approximately $2.5 million, which is more than we've actually ever allocated for instructional materials, except in the years that we have had ARP and ESSER funds to do a full adoption. So for next year, the request has come in for $2.5 million for a K-12 district-wide science adoption. And so we're working with Mr. LaBarbera and Dr. Kennedy and his office to look at how we can best strategically craft a budget in a way that we can adopt a full K-12 science adoption for next year. The reading allocation, we reduced that down to $857,000 based on what they're spending currently and an estimate for next year. As you can see in the 23-24, the reading allocation was about 1.1 million, and we looked at their expenditures and reduced that down to about 857,000. And in the teacher classroom supply assistance funds, we put a round number to it, as I call it, about $400,000 or a $42,000 increase. Again, that's just an estimate because those categoricals that you're looking at are now considered part of the base funding that we have to subtract away from the base funding. So from my $918,000 increase, I now drop down to approximately $962,000 in a deficit. I'll pause at this point if there's any questions. If not, I'll just keep going.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you. So as I do every year, we look ahead and see, okay, what are the items that are new to the budget that will cause an impact to the budget for next year? And this is not an all-inclusive list at this point, but these are the things that, as we work through our departments, as we work with our exterior partners, et cetera, that we can identify that we are going to have an impact to the budget. So line item number one is obviously the carry forward from the previous slide. We also have to reserve FTE, the 140 increase in the charter schools, that if they don't show up, then we have the money, we can easily send that back to the DOE. So we are reserving that $1.3 million. We don't hand out that FTE until the 10-day count that we know that they're in our seats. And for charter schools, we keep that unless they make their FTE projections. The third item is funding for non-K-12 science materials. We're estimating that we need about $300,000 now in the current budget. I worked with Dr. Kennedy and Mr. LaBarbera as well to set aside funds out of the current year budget after instructional materials were bought, so we can save that for next year and add it to this $300,000 to set aside for the workbooks and quote-unquote free materials that you get with your textbook orders that we have to pay for the shipping and other torn materials and tattered books and stuff like that. So we have set aside about $300,000 plus what we're reserving in the budget out of this year's budget to roll forward. I do realize that I have two number threes, my apology. The next item is the impact of Florida Statute 435.12, the re-fingerprinting of all employees beginning January of 2025. And I'm working with Mr. Frangella, the chief of our security, and I'm going to try my best to explain this, that the state wants all fingerprints in the clearinghouse. And the clearinghouse currently works through DCF and early learning, which primarily houses extended day and your pre-K folks. The FDLE has other employees, and apparently the statute requires all employees to be housed in the clearinghouse. So obviously the logical question is, well, why can't I just go ahead and move them over from the FDLE over into the clearinghouse? And apparently there are some barriers to making that happen. So we have put that in there as an unfunded mandate, and the estimate is about $70, as I recall, per employee, and we have to start that beginning in January of 2025. Mr. Frangella is here if you have any questions. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer them for you.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Frangella? Roberts?
So do we have anybody in the clearinghouse now, or is everybody in the FLDOE?
So right now, we have just anybody who's working in pre-K and early learning. So
So-
anybody that's in extended day. So they all go through the clearinghouse now.
So how many is that are in the clearinghouse as opposed to how many do we have to move?
So I don't have the exact numbers, but starting January 1st of 2025, we have to start doing the entire district. So every single person in the entire state of Florida in every school district has to go into the clearinghouse starting the 2025 school, January 1st. Now, they do give us some time frames, so anybody who was hired prior to January 1st, June 30th of 2021 will have to be printed by June 30th of 2025. And then they give you some timelines for the remaining people that were hired from 2021 to present.
So instead of just putting a number of 300,000 on that, can you get something that shows us, I mean, obviously, if we redid everybody at the same time, that's going to be a manpower issue too. So, but if we can get some kind of spread to know how that 300,000 is going to be utilized, whether that's all in this fiscal year, Carter, or whether some of that laps over into the next one, how many are in extended day that we don't need to do, but how many that, do you understand what I'm asking you?
So, yeah, extended day and our people that are in pre-K, we don't have to print them again. Once you're in that system, you're there, and we don't have to do it over again. This is only for the other staff members that were actually in the FDLE holding of the backgrounds. The reason they're going to this is once you get into the clearinghouse, it's easier for you to move from agency to agency. So now, once you're in the clearinghouse, Frank Frangella goes to another district, they could just request it, you keep the same prints, you don't have to go through the system again. And that's why the state is doing this.
Yeah, and I think what I'm asking Carter is if you can figure out how many is this fiscal year and how many is next fiscal year, based on the parameters that he's saying, if you're done by a certain time, you have staggered deadlines depending on when your fingerprints are done. So even though you're saying at $70 a person, it's 300,000, I'm just want to have some assurance that we really think we're going to be doing 300,000 in 1 year, or whether we think that's going to be spread out over 2 fiscal years.
Okay.
Correct?
First, did you have anything?
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say about the clearinghouse, they do have to be redone every 5 years still. Like, it's not, you're in and you're in forever.
Thank you.
To respond to Board Member Roberts' question or request, I will work with Mr. Frangella to give you that spread to see how much we need to do this year and the staggered schedule as you requested.
So one other thing that you were talking about where you did the reserve for the charter school FTE, so I need you to try to help me understand the 1.3 million. So we're given money, so let's say I think I have 100 students at a charter school, and we're given that money for those students, and now only half of those, 50 of those show up, so now I owe the 9,000 for those extra 50, but they gave me the money I'm sending back. So,
Correct.
So why is it costing me 1.3? Because it's included in the income that I got that I'm then giving back. Is it a cash flow issue? Is it I mean,
Essentially, they're funding you based on projections, and in the third FEFP calculation in October, when we do the actual count, if they're not there, so let's say, again, in your hypothetical, I'm projecting 100, but only 50 show up, then the state will then start prorating our budget down. So it does become a cash flow, but it's also a budgetary issue, because at the end of the fiscal year, you will only be paid for the 50 that you have in-house. So this extra, this is up and above their projection that we're reserving.
okay, and I still don't understand that. I don't understand why, if I think I'm getting 1,000 charter school kids, right?
Right.
And I get funded for 1,000 charter school kids,
Right.
and they give me the money for 1,000, and then only 700 of them show up.
Right,
I've gotten the money for the 1,000.
right.
So now I have
So
the money for 300 to send back,
Correct.
correct? So why do I need 1.3 million to set aside in order to give the money back? Because I already have that money.
So the 1.3 represents what, in your hypothetical,
Yeah.
would represent the 300 that you probably won't have, because what we do is that we have the projection that we send to the state based on the model, but we also have the projection that the charter school actually gives us. So the difference between those two, you multiply that by the total funds per student, and that's how you get the 1.3 million.
Let me try one more time.
Sure.
So I think I have 1,000 students. The charter school projects I'm going to have 1,000 students. So based on the 1,000 students, and let's just call it $9,000, okay?
Sure.
So based on the charter school projection of 1,000 students, I get X number of dollars from the state,
Right?
correct?
Yes.
If the charter school doesn't have all those students show up,
Right?
I owe the state back for the money. So let's say only half of them show up.
Right.
Okay? Half of them show up. I owe the state has given me money for 1,000 students. I now need to give them back money
Right.
for 500 students that didn't show up.
Right.
They gave me the money, I'm giving the money back.
I think,
So why do I need to set aside 1.3 million
Right.
additional money
so
as a
the-
budget impactor?
I think the key there is from day one, we don't fund them for the full $9,000 in your hypothetical. So we only fund them in your hypothetical, when you said that we projected 1,000 and we funded them for 1,000, well, the state, based on the model that we picked, would be funding us for, let's say, 1,200. So that difference is what we're setting aside. We fund them for what they project, but in the model, that number is higher. So in order for us not to, what we could do is fund them everything. We could fund them all of it from day one. The trouble is that when they get to October and they don't have those students, then now we're cutting their budget back significantly. So the reserve is for the difference between what they actually projected and what the state is actually funding in your projection. And I'm sure there's a better way of explaining that, but in the hypothetical, what you're saying is the difference between what they projected and what the state is funding, because those are two different numbers.
Am I the only one who doesn't get this? Does everybody else understand this and it's just me? Okay, all right. They understand. I'll come talk to you
Yes, ma'am.
privately, because I don't understand why when they're giving us money, we need to set aside money that they've given us to give back to them. I don't,
Correct.
He's setting aside the extra,
The extra,
just in case.
up and above.
So if he gives it to them and they spend it, then,
So
sure, I
you know,
understand that, but.
instead of giving it to him, he's setting it aside and
Can I-
not giving all of it to him. He's only giving him that 300,
can I,
or the whole bit that he needs.
Right,
That way
but
they
we're
pay
only,
300
we're
back.
only working on the number of FTE we have, so why are we, never mind, they all get it, so. Guess we'll all be happy. Thank you.
okay. Yes, ma'am. Moving through the slides, I believe I was at the second number 3, and again, I apologize for that estimate. Again, for number 4, we just put in a round number right now at this point for estimated overhead costs due to inflationary impact. We typically, at the end of the year, to look at our supply budget year over year and kind of apply a percentage to that, and that's kind of how we come up with that number. The next one, number 5, just wanted to pause and talk a little bit about that one. As you may be aware, that Florida statutes allow the Auditor General to audit us every year. Unless your population exceeds $150,000 and you are a low-risk auditee. At that point, the Auditor General has the option of skipping the auditing the school district for 2 years and come back on the 3rd year on the rotation. So as you may recall, the board went through an auditor selection process a couple years ago, and they selected Cherry Beckert as the auditors for our district. So we're coming up on the 23-24 operational, financial, and federal single audit for this year. And we've put a round number in there, about $150,000. It was close to that when we took the bid rates and implemented that based on the board's selection. But I need to discuss with you, having conversations with Cherry Beckert, is that what they would recommend if we're going to do an operational audit, which an operational audit checks to make sure that there's a certain statute, for example, that requires us to put financial transparency information on our website. They will go and they will check to make sure that we've done that. Those are the types of things that an operational audit does. However, instead of just pretty much looking at the same thing year over year, what they're recommending to us is that they do a risk-based operational audit, which would cost less. So for example, if I were to say I'm doing a financial audit and say, okay, I got $1 million in cash on my balance sheet, well, they would test that assertion. They would want to see my bank rec. They want to see the statements. They want to see all the supporting documents. Whereas, for example, maybe not a good example, but a risky portion or operation in your department, in your operation, would be, say, for example, payroll. We've got given the size of our payroll, that would be an area that they may want to look at. Looking at federal dollars, ARP, that might be something that they want to look at specifically, as opposed to just checking things that have always been checked and passed. So what I was saying to you is that I'd like to bring back to you at the next session that we have together a delineation that would show here's how much it would be for an operational audit, a risk-based assessment audit, the financial audit, and of course our, we call it the ACFR, which is the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, known as our CAFR, and bring that back to you for some discussion on what you would like to do, because you do have the option of skipping the operational audit or doing an operational audit, but something more laser-focused in a risk-based approach. Okay. The next one, on item number 6, I'd like to turn that over to the superintendent to just discuss a little bit about the Kindergarten Ambassadors Program. We were able to pay for that program out of ESSER dollars this year, so there's a recommendation coming forward or discussion about potentially paying that out of the general fund.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morrison. So the Kindergarten Ambassadors Program has been highly successful the last couple of years. We have been able to really assist our future kindergarten parents with the opportunity to go to all of our schools to really promote the kindergarten blast-off ahead of time, to make sure that as many of our VPK students are entering our kindergarten classrooms, and as well as students throughout the community that didn't otherwise go to a VPK program but are looking to start kindergarten for the first time. So this is something that, as Carter mentioned, we have funded through ESSER ARP over the last couple of years. This would be the first year that we would take it over in the general, and so I wanted to bring it forward as a possible consideration for the budget, because I do not think that it's something that we can just pull away from now that we've started. We certainly could look at that $119,000 and find ways that we could decrease the amount in what we're specifically spending, but the $119,400 is what has been funding over the last 2 years. So we brought forward the full amount. I certainly can work with with staff, at the pleasure of the board, to decrease where we can decrease, but that is, the request is on the table for that.
Ms. Powers?
I've just asked, can we get a breakdown? Did they get teachers get a stipend, or what are we spending $119,000? So when we bring that item back, if we could kind of see where the dollars are going.
Absolutely, and we do have that.
Anyone else have any more questions for this particular item?
When we bring that item back, to Mrs. Powers' point, I will go ahead and highlight the areas that I think in my discussion with staff we can eliminate and do without, and those items that we need to fund fully.
Thank you.
Item number 7, pretty much every year when I stand before you and lay this out as the budget impactors, that's one of the top ones that we have that impose cost on us that have to deduct from the budget. This year, the FRS, the regular rate went from 13.57% to 13.63%, which is 0.06 percentage points. So a marginal increase this year over the prior year. So at this point, we have done some preliminary analysis looking at positions for next year, increased the rate to about 13.63%, which that regular rate covers most of our employee base. So it's within about $100,000. And of course, I'll come back with an more accurate number once we roll over everybody in the system and take out the retirees, et cetera. Item number 8 is new teacher budget support. As you may recall, Mr. Raymond did a presentation late last year with you discussing teachers in the 0 through 4 range that we were losing, not because of salary purposes, but due to, I guess it said, other personal reasons, which more had to do with I'm a new teacher and I need support in the classroom. From that, we've been having the teacher retention input committee meetings, and of course, we wanted to bring this forward as a supplement to your Martin Mentors program, which is to support and mentor new teachers to aid in our retention. And Mr. Raymond, if you would like to add a word or so with the board's permission and superintendent's permission, we can do that.
Mr. Raymond?
Sure. That's very loud. The premise of these dollars would be to really look at during the day mentoring opportunities. So the Martin Mentors are full-time teachers who offer support typically after the school day. When we meet with our teachers in the Teacher Retention Input Committee, the number one ask is for support during the day. So to Ms. Powers' point, where would these dollars go? It's under review with Superintendent Main, but one very plausible plan would be to allow a school site to request a substitute teacher during the day so that mentoring could happen from a senior teacher during the day and support those teachers when they need it most, when students are present in the classroom versus after school when it's more theory and things of that nature. So this would be in addition to the Martin Mentors program.
Ms. Pritchett?
To that explanation, I had a detailed conversation with a senior employee of the district who was very much interested in actually participating in what you're talking about and has been approached by younger, newer teachers. Could you help us? And I think it's a great little slot to fill. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for your consideration.
Any other questions?
Item number 9 is I contacted the county with respect to what we can expect from them for their contribution through the fees collected when someone gets a ticket. That comes to us, and we use that funding as a part of the Doris Schlossberg driver's ed program. Unfortunately, the county indicated that our allocation for next year at this point looks like it's going to be a flat $65,000, and the board did approve the contract for next year. So there is an increase in our share of that program of about $27,156. The next item is moving the district-based bus planner software from a server to the cloud. The cost looks like it's about $17,340. And I'd like to, again, turn over to the superintendent. Item number 11, where we're expanding the Odyssey of the Mind to middle schools for an impact of about $10,425. Superintendent?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. So this year, we had offered the Odyssey of the Mind to all 12 of our elementary schools. I'm happy to report that 9 of our elementary schools, to keep in with the whole STEM idea, 9 of our elementary schools participated. 2 of our schools made it to states, Jensen Beach Elementary and Palm City Elementary. I'm also happy to report that state competition was this past Easter weekend, and Palm City Elementary came in 3rd place at the state level. There's a request for most of these students that make up the teams are in 5th grade, and they would like to continue the Odyssey of the Mind competition into 6th grade at their respective schools. The coaches had a wonderful conversation with me, and I had an opportunity to Zoom with the teams, and this is something that the community, the parents, and the students are very, very excited about, and hopefully will end up feeding the SPAM program down the road, because many of those students are interested in robotics and hands-on engineering and arts programs. And so at this point, to move it into the middle school for that to continue would be the cost of the $10,000. And that's mostly for registration fees, the cost of the stipends for the coaches to be able to coach the Odyssey of the Mind, which fits into the approved category already, and be able to pay for their costs for their teams.
Thank you. You have any questions? Ms. Pritchett?
Not a question, just we got a nice email today from a parent whose child was a participant and it was just so nice to read it and learn more about it. So I think it's definitely something that we should consider.
We are going to present a little recognition for both of those teams that made it to the state. World competition only required, it required a 1st place. So for Palm City in their first year, to come in 3rd out of 18 teams at the state level in Orlando was incredible, and we got a lot of kudos from the state director of Odyssey of the Mind that Martin County has increased the number of schools that have participated in a number of years. So,
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to slide 11, the carry forward decrease is about $3.7 million at this point. And line items number 13, 14, and 15 kind of go together, where I've put a little note at the bottom right that we have a potential to pay for the HSA contribution as we have in the past. We'll try to get that out of the door before our SAARP funds expire. I will work with the Grants Management Department to see if we can capitalize on some of those ARP dollars with respect to the HSA contribution for the high deductible plan, the buy down of the premium increase for the $30,000 for the high deductible plan. What you don't see on here, which is what I'm trying to calculate at this point, is it looks like we would have a savings from the prior to July 1, 2020 group that typically costs about $500,000. I think it came down to like $336,000, so that some of that may offset what we're looking at here. So I just wanted an opportunity to do that final calculation and bring that forward. But I wanted to put this on the slide so that you are aware of it. Item number 16, we'll talk about that on the other slides coming up. But just to let you know at this juncture that the superintendent and leadership team, we're examining our budgets and allocations in order to address that deficit coming forward. It's a little bit higher than it was last year at about this time. However, we do have a lot going on, and we will work as hard as possible to bring that deficit projected deficit under control. So moving on to the next slide, which is the update on positions funded through the ARP. As we discussed on February 13, these funds will be expiring in September of this year, and we have done some preliminary work. This is not a final final recommendation, but we do have, if you would like, I can walk you through each individual slot, but we do have an ESC Behavioral Tech, for example, number 1. The estimated cost is about $45,000. That FTE has been transferred to the IDEA grant. The clerk, which was a part of a FIT program, which is the Families in Transition program, that has been transferred to Title I. The coordinator of extended learning position, TBD at this point. The graduation specialist, those two have been added to the general fund at the district level. The grant administrator of federal funds has been transferred over to the Title I roll forward and written into the grant. The 3 Head Start educators have been absorbed into the Head Start VPK grant. The 2 instructional coaches have been transferred to the general fund to implement the co-teach model at middle schools. The junior network engineer we discussed the last time, that cost is reimbursable from the capital funds. The multimedia journalist has been included in the board's strategic plan and approved. The 2 nurses are reimbursed through our contract with the health department. The 2 paraprofessional basic positions have been moved to vacant positions that are in the general fund. The 2 prevention intervention specialists, they have been moved to general fund, 1 for Title I, and we're actually eliminating another one, which is an update that I received late this afternoon, so I will have to change that on the slide coming forward. I do show that under other funds, but one will be moved to Title I, and we're going to eliminate the other one. The school counselor, alternative school, those 2. Riverbend eliminated and traded 2 general fund positions in order to accommodate 1, so 1 will be eliminated and 1 has been traded. The school psychologist has been moved to the general fund in a vacant position. The school social services worker has been eliminated. That position has been vacant all year. The student support technician, the 18, at this point are TBD. This is not, though, the ET student techs that Dr. Adrian has in his budget, so these are separate and apart from that. We have 7 CTE high school. Those were moved to the general fund allocations. The teacher elementary school, the 4, those were eliminated. There were 2 critical thinking positions at Port Salerno and 2 at Warfield. And if I may point out that Warfield is spelled incorrectly, if you could just make a note of that. And the 6 high school teachers, we have reduced the school within a school. We've done, the recommendation, at least at this point, is 1 per high school, so that would go down to approximately 1 per high school. So actually, that number needs to be updated. I'll fix that when I come back. So at this point, that's some preliminary work that we have done to address the upcoming expiration. At this point, if you were to add up everything that went into the general fund, some of them mostly went into vacant positions. It's about $900,000. So as we work with our allocations, looking at the allocations and our projections for next year, we are working to make sure that we're not adding anything to the general fund that is not warranted. Any questions on the slide so far?
Any questions?
Next steps on slide 14, we are currently working with our departments, reviewing their budgets. Just remind everyone that the superintendent has directed that most, if not all departments, roll back their budgets to the 22-23 expenditure levels. We will continue to review our allocations, working with my office and the Deputy Superintendent's office with respect to their school site allocations, also looking at the superintendent's reorganization. And again, I put TBD, and he has talked about coming forward in May with that. And the next budget workshop will be on June the 4th, 2024, at which time I do have some deliverables that I need to bring forward to you based on our conversation today. On slide number 15, just a follow-up, in the February 13th budget workshop, we discussed, the board member Powers, I believe, asked a question that if students are zoned to the West CSA and attend South Fork High School, for example, could that benefit not travel with that student to that zone? It is very complicated, to be honest with you. There are several statutes that we are actually looking at, primarily Florida Statute 163.31, 3180, 31801, and we also have a copy of the interlocal agreement for school planning, facilities planning, and siting that we're reviewing. Preliminarily, we've reached out to the consultant with the information that you see listed there. What we're gathering is that many of her school district clients are still using post-2019 funds on a district-wide basis. They have established what they have called benefit zones, which are separate and apart from the CSA, which stands for Concurrency Service Areas. The interlocal agreement that we have with the county that was approved, well, this one is stamped on March 25th, 2008, establishes those concurrency service zones, but with the district's ability to rezone, and especially in the face of choice, then what I'm being told is that it is more than likely that that benefit will be able to travel with that student. However, we need something conclusive. So I will bring that back to you when we get to the next budget workshop. And that's where we are at this point with that issue. Any questions? Okay. The next update that I have for you is on the 24-25 property insurance renewal. On March 26, Relations Insurance presented to the SCREMP Management Pool the preliminary 24-25 budget for the pool's property insurance renewal. I believe as we speak, Mr. McCreary is in London negotiating with our carriers, but on the preliminary draft you see in front of you, Martin County School District would see a marginal decrease in our property premium for next year. The total insured value of the pool is approximately $3.995 billion. The corridor is somewhere between $85 million now, with an option to go to potentially $100 million in coverage for an additional premium. In this scenario, as I mentioned, that we would see a marginal decrease in our property renewal. And pursuant to Florida Statute 101171, we do pay for our property, we are authorized to pay for our property premium out of local capital improvement funds for this cost. So with that, Madam Chair, Mr. Superintendent, I would like to now turn it over to Dr. Adrian, who would like to give a presentation on district-wide printing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Carter. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Main. I'm here to provide an update on the managed print solutions that have been in place since 2013. And with that, we're also asking for the board's input on how to proceed on the information that's provided on these next few presentation slides. In 2013, the school district implemented a print managed solution. And with that, the solution included adding multifunction printers and classroom printers. And those multifunction printers are capable of printing, copying, scanning, both in black and white and in color. The classroom printers were provided for teachers in the classroom. Additionally, we also purchased a PaperCut solution, which is a software that helps us manage our print solutions for being able to monitor progress and tracking the print usage. The solution was to address shadow IT, which is also prevents people from bringing their own printers on site and schools purchasing their printers outside of this managed printer solution. And also, in addition to that, we use the reprographics department for larger print jobs. And this goal is to provide a common solution for all school sites and the district staff. I want to bring your attention to the next slide, which shows the January 2023 print report. And as you can see, the total amount of print jobs printed pages were 1,004,228 print jobs, are printed pages. I do want to point out, though, that this did include classroom teacher printers, multifunction printers, both at school sites and the district office, and the reprographics department. Fast forward a year to January of 2024, and you can see that the print job has gone up quite a bit from 1 million up to 1,111,059 printed pages. So with that, you can see an increase in 47,731 printed pages on classroom printers compared to 2023. And then the common area printers, an increase of 8,581 printed pages. So our current vendor has a recommendation of the printers in terms of the multifunction printers being purchased, of ensuring that when you look at the age span of the device, we look at the amount of printed pages and then, of course, the years the printer's been in service. And with that, we've been told that after 500,000 pages or 10 years of use, that it's time to replace the printers. I had a report run recently that shows 42 of the 93 multifunction printers have printed over 500,000 pages in the last 11 years. And being that they are 11 years old, it does exceed the recommendation by the manufacturer. The common area MFPs have not been sold for the last 3 years. So the printers that we have been purchasing over the years for the schools, those devices are no longer, or those types of printers are no longer in service to be sold. And now, just like we've been told with some of the white fleet vehicles, finding parts for these printers is also a challenge to obtain. And as they break down and being able to service those is going to become a challenge. Another issue we've had is related to security enhancements that have been brought up through Microsoft. Currently, ET does have a temporary solution in place, but eventually the ability to print or to scan to email or scan to a network folder will be a challenge due to security requirements with this dated hardware. So as we look at the current printer solutions in place, it's broken down by elementary, middle, and high school and district office to show the multifunction printers in place, which totals 93. And then the teacher printers at the various levels. Obviously, the district office does not have teacher classroom printers, but you can see there that there's 1,358 printers in circulation. So this is where we are seeking the board's vision as far as how we want to proceed here. The multifunction printers are to replace them. I did get some information regarding bulk pricing. If we were to purchase it in bulk pricing, it would cost $396,459 to replace those devices. So breaking that down, it becomes $4,263 per device. And then the classroom printers, the totals would be $427,770 or $315 per printer. So looking at pros and cons to replacing the classroom printers. So the fact that we did get 11 years currently out of the classroom printers is definitely a good value when we purchase those in long-term use. But as I did mention, parts are becoming difficult to obtain, and then replacing those is going to be a challenge. But the pros are that teachers would get a new printer that could last up to 10 years, and it'd only be $315 per printer at the bulk price rate. Teacher flexibility to print at their own convenience, and of course, the equity issue with the teachers all having their own printer would be addressed by purchasing new printers. In terms of cons, we're looking at, well, the $427,770. It's a big price tag, and not necessarily saying that we would have to purchase both the multifunction printers this year and the classroom printers. We could spread that out where we purchase multifunction printers over the next fiscal year and then push the classroom teachers back another year if that's what the board chooses. And then, of course, as the printing report I showed, one issue that is a con relating to replacing the classroom printers is the excessive printing. So now looking at the pros and cons of not replacing classroom printers. So if we decided not to replace them and just kind of phased out what we had now, obviously the pro would be there's no no price associated with that. And then that would also lead to a potential of a decrease in the amount of print jobs coming from the classrooms. However, the cons associated with that is that we would need to purchase additional multifunction printers and place them throughout the schools. There could be issues related to teacher satisfaction. It lacks the equity in the classrooms for teacher printers, so if we phase out the teachers' printers and Carter has a printer that's working fine and I don't, I'm not going to have mine replaced, but Carter would be able to print from his until it breaks down. And then, of course, there could be a potential impact for instruction for the students. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over back to Mr. Morrison and the board for any dialogue or questions that may be present.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Ms. Roberts?
So is this the 427 and your other numbers, are they included in your overall technology budget and capital? Or is this in addition to what that number is?
This would be in addition, Ms. Roberts. This was we do have a printer budget, but that's about $93,000 per year for various products that we're purchasing and some of the software. The renewal of the paper cut software is about $13,000, I believe. And then Mr. Morrison and I did discuss the potential of looking at this from other funds, because this was when this was purchased in 2013, it was just an outright purchase for the entire district. So it's not something that would be easily phased in and phased out.
So at some point, you're going to be giving us is this being taken out of sequence from your overall capital budget for the ET budget? So I mean, it's, one of the things that we've discussed as a board before is taking things, not looking at them holistically as the entire item. And it appears, since this is part of your ET budget, that we don't have a current ET budget from you.
So if I may respond to that, Mrs. Roberts, that depending upon which option, on which direction that the board and superintendent receive, then we would amend our 24-25 plan accordingly. So it's planning for the 24-25 school year and bringing this issue to the front so that we can make some financial decisions one way or the other.
So you're asking for the board to determine whether they want to make this, and then at some other point, we're going to see the ET budget, correct? Is that what we're doing?
The ET budget, pretty much for the 5 years, has been set, except for once we get the tax roll number, then we would make whatever revenue adjustments, et cetera, to that. This would be additional to whatever the allocation would be for 24-25, depending upon which way we go.
So your plan for ET is to take the 4 years, the last 4 years of last year's 5-year capital budget and just use those? Is that what our plan is?
No, ma'am. So whatever, this is a new cost.
No, I don't mean for this piece. I mean, we would be adding this on to whatever year 2, 3, 4, and 5 is from before.
Yes, I don't think we're asking for that full amount in 1 year. It could be a phased approach, it could be.
It definitely would be, gets back to the pricing structure too for the bulk rate. So purchasing at the bulk price rate would be a significant savings, and I can get you, Carter, I can look at some quotes for that. But the other thing too is we need to be mindful of the fact that the multifunction printers that we're asking for initially, there are security issues that we've come across that ET has fixed related to scanning of documents that would be able to scan and send to an email and scan and send to a network share. And that right now there's a security update coming from Microsoft that the hardware cannot support that. So we're up against that as well.
Right, so I'm only one of 5, but personally, I think that we should be looking at the entire ET budget and not pulling pieces out here and just adding to the budget, but I leave it to my fellow board members.
Ms. Powers?
I agree.
Ms. Pritchett?
I have a question regarding, so right now, when a printer fails for whatever reason, are we retiring it or repairing it?
Right
and
now-
what does that cost?
Right now, we're repairing that, and that's part of our contract with our vendor. But the vendor has expressed to us that getting the parts is the challenge now, because eventually we're going to not be able to find the parts, and then the printer would just not work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I would like to know the difference, what it would be like to buy it in bulk versus piecemealing it. If we could get that number, that would be great.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
Madam Chair, this concludes Budget Workshop number 2. Thank you very much for your time and for the input. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next will be our Code of Student Conduct presentation. Dr. Estevez, would you like to come forward? You can go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Main. Can't hear me? Can you hear me?
A little better.
Let's try that one again. Better?
A little bit.
I gotta bring it closer. I want to make sure that I'm able to keep the binder on here as well. Is that better for you all?
That's better.
Okay, I'll raise my voice. So good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Main. I'm Lisa Estevez. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services. And this evening, we have Dr. Vanessa Muto is here with us, and we also have Mrs. Quintina Harris, both of which who have been very integral in our community feedback with our student code of conduct. You have a binder in front of you, correct? And so what I'm going to ask you to do to make it a little bit easier to navigate is to take out the presentation, because we will be referring to some pages, or if you want to just look at the presentation, that would be fine as well. Okay?
I don't have the presentation printed.
Yes, you do. Your binder
Is it in the binder?
Yes. So your binder is tabbed with the student code of conduct.
Oh, here you go.
Okay.
And then you have workshop presentation, and then you have decision tree, and you have the policy section.
All right.
Do you think it'd be better? Okay, let's see. You'll let me know if this is better. Huh? Is that good?
Yes, that's much
Okay.
better. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it gonna buzz? He's gonna fix that. Okay. So just would like to start by explaining that the Code of Student Conduct feedback sessions, there was 3 sessions. It doesn't
This is
sound good, right?
He's going to cut it.
Is he cutting? Good?
Go ahead.
Does that work?
Can we take a quick break?
Is
while they
that
work through
better?
that? 'Cause
Yes.
You wanna take a break?
We're going to take a quick recess.
So we get this figured out.
Resume in just a moment. We'll get this sorted out. Thank you.
Of course. Evening, Madam Chair.
We will resume this workshop. It's okay.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Main. I'm Lisa Estevez, the Assistant Superintendent of Student Support Services. This evening also here, we have Dr. Vanessa Muto, who is the Coordinator of Student Services, and we have Ms. Quintina Harris, who is the Manager of Mental Health. All of us have been involved in the preparation for this evening's discussion about components of the Student Code of Conduct. So just for a little bit of a background, we held the Student Code of Conduct feedback a little bit different this year than it has been done in past years. There were 3 feedback sessions, and a 4th one we had to add because we needed to vote on what was bringing forward to you all this evening. So the committee was comprised of community members, site-based administrators, teachers, students, and actually had some parents that also were a part of it. So the members of the committee were assigned to one of 5 groups, and they were each to address attendance, dress code, tobacco, bullying, and wireless communication devices. Please note that some of the feedback that was given was already included in our already current policy or in our procedure, but we wanted to ensure that the committee members' voices were shared, and that's why you'll hear some things that we may already have in our policy, but we want to make sure that we're pointing out where it is in the book. So a question for the board, what is the board's pleasure? As we navigate these 5 areas, what would be the best option moving forward? To just stop after each area to discuss, or to get through the entire presentation and then go back and ask questions?
I think we should do it by section.
Yes, okay. After
And
each,
I'm just curious if you could also provide to us the members of the committee and their role. So if they were a parent, if they were a school administrator, a school principal, like how the makeup is. You don't necessarily have to give us their names, but.
I can give you actually the entire information, don't have it with me, but as far as we had, so elementary representative, site-based, like a assistant principal. There was mostly assistant principals at the secondary level, high school, middle school, and elementary. There also were some other community members and parents that were part of the sessions, and we had some teachers from different school sites, and there were some students they were initially part of the student feedback sessions that were done prior to the community feedback sessions, and they were invited to come as well. But we can provide you with a list of the makeup of the committee in detail after the board meeting if you'd like.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
you're welcome. Okay, so the first area that we're going to be discussing is in policy 5511, which was the student dress code. There was some recommendations to remove some language that restricts middle school footwear. If you don't mind, please look at your tab on the side of the binder, and please turn that to page 46 in the Student Code of Conduct in your binder. So if you look, you will see that under number 4, under the procedures, there's a section that talks about the shoes and the footwear. One of the recommendations that came from the group was that they wanted to change the current language, and they wanted to be able to remove and allow for middle school students to wear Crocs without the back straps. Okay, as you can see, the current language expresses that for safety reasons, that elementary students may not wear sandals or open-toe shoes, and then it goes into elementary and middle school students are not permitted to wear flip-flops or shoes without a back. So that would be one of the first suggestions and recommendations for consideration by the board. The next section is ID badges. If you would mind, please turn your page in the Code of Conduct to page 14. Currently, the definition in the Student Code of Conduct actually talks about failure to visibly wear your ID badge in your front upper torso. The recommendation from the group was to remove wearing the ID badge on the front upper torso, and they wanted to allow the ID badge to be worn on their person. And the examples that were given would be in their pocket or in the backpack. And so there was some conversation back and forth with the team members about if it's in a backpack, if it's in the pocket, if it's not visible, how can it be worn by being visible, and would this be a safety concern? And as you can see in the code of conduct, a level 1 offense was ID violation, and that is number 6, where they want it on the upper torso. So that was the recommendations brought forward for dress code. Is there any discussion that the board would be interested in having about that?
Ms. Powers?
So I'm just curious on the remove wearing it on the front upper torso. It kind of defeats the purpose of the ID. I can tell you there was a lot of discussion when the ID badges were talked about in reviewing the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas tragedy. And the point is that when someone is on your campus, that you immediately are able to see their ID and know that they belong on your campus. I know that it's become an issue, like kids are putting gift cards in it, and, you know, I've heard all of those things happening, so it's not 100% foolproof, but it's even harder to know if they don't have a lanyard or even a card. I mean, I don't know if that's a good idea, and it kind of takes us back prior to the recommendations of the MSD Commission. And I guess I would like our safety and security staff to weigh in on that as well.
Mr. Frangella, would you like to come forward?
So I agree with what Mrs. Powers said. Having it displayed serves a couple of things. So yes, what was just mentioned about being able to quickly identify who's supposed to be on campus. Every single person either has to have a student ID, a staff ID, a visitor badge, or the contractor badge. So the second thing is, even for our administrators and teachers, they could identify a student very quickly if they needed to too, if they have to address the student. So there are a couple of things that we would be going backwards. We use it for our reunification, we use it for our bus transportation, for lunch. We use the badge for a lot of different reasons, and I think having it displayed is the right way to go, and we would absolutely be going backwards if we allow them to keep it in their bag.
Thank you, I completely agree. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Ms. Pritchett?
With reference to the croc issue, if a middle school student can wear open-toe shoes with a back strap, I don't see an issue with the croc, as long as the back strap is on it. Saying without the back strap defeats the rest of the code with regard to they have to wear open-toe shoe with a back strap, but a croc without. So I think we need to be consistent one way or the other. I'm not certain how I feel about back straps to begin with, but I certainly don't think you do one and then do something else with a different type of shoe. We're not in the fashion industry here. So I think we need to determine back strap versus no back strap, as opposed to open toe with, croc without. That's my opinion on it.
Ms. Roberts, did you have something?
So did you discuss this with Mr. Calderon as far as safety goes for the backstrap, for the shoe safety piece?
No, I have
Has it-
not, because I'm just bringing forward the feedback from the sessions to just bring back to the board members. So no, haven't had an opportunity to discuss because not sure if what changes would or would not be made. So not at this time. I had not.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And also, please, let's note and remember too, there were some students, obviously, that were part of the discussion, and some of those comments and suggestions came from some of the students. But again, that's their voice, and we want to make sure that we give voice to everybody who was on the committee. So we're just sharing some of those ideas.
Ms. Roberts?
So when you're sharing these ideas, are these ideas that are coming singularly from one person, or are these ideas that the committee has kind of agreed to? So for instance, when you're talking about whether it's backstraps, whether it's name badges, whatever, is this a singular idea, say, from two students, or does this have the approval and the buy-in from administration and the representatives from schools that are there? How are these recommendations coming to us?
So when the committees, they were assigned, so the committee members were assigned to groups. So you got to go to attendance, you got to go to bullying, and then you sat in a group, and what we did was they scribed and was able to write down some of their recommendations and suggestions, and that's where we came back to the district and put all the information down about what they may have said or what they have asked for, and that's how we derived at what we were bringing forward. There wasn't a lot of discussion about dress code outside of these two areas that we were bringing forward to you.
Okay, so I guess my question was, if it went to the dress code group, was this a consensus from the dress code group, or is this one of the things that was mentioned by the dress code group? So for instance, if the six of us were in the dress code group, is the suggestions that we're seeing coming as a result of discussions from the group, or is it Diane Falls, one of the six, saying, I think X, Y, Z?
It could have been one of the six or two of the six that brought it up, and they had discussion and was fine with moving forward and bringing it to the board as a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other further discussion about the dress code portion? No? Okay. So we're gonna move on. The next section was the tobacco-free environment. So this was another conversation that we had noted, that it was mentioned that the offense for tobacco should be included in in-school suspension. And so we, in blue, we indicated that that already does exist. We also had a recommendation for THC as an infraction to be ISS. And we have in your binder the decision tree that talks about tobacco infractions and vaping, and you can clearly see tobacco is a level 3 infraction. It is currently in the Student Code of Conduct, and it was just something that was asked, and we did explain to the group members or to particular group that had mentioned it, that THC is an infraction. It is a level 3 infraction, and that it is currently in our Student Code of Conduct, and that is under your tobacco, your TBC tab. So in that respect, that was just what was asked and thought. The other thing was supervised community service within the school was something that was brought up by that tobacco and tobacco group. And they said that they felt it would be good to add community service as a consequence under level 2 responses and sanctions, which can be found, we would be adding it if it was the pleasure of the board, to page 19. So on 19, you see that there are level 2 responses and sanctions, and in there would be community service, would be one of the things that we would add there. The other thing was some of the group felt like it should be included in school-sponsored events, that we should make sure that during school-sponsored events that we should be holding to our tobacco policy. We also did explain that it already is in our policy 5512, which you have in the back of your binder under policies. We've highlighted it to show that, that we do have it in our general statement policy for the tobacco. Okay. Another comment that came up in discussion was about parent and guardian involvement, and I think sometimes what may happen is that there's a possibility that outside community members, parents, or students might not know that we do involve the parent from the beginning when an infraction has occurred and a student is going to get a referral for a TBC, which is tobacco. This is our current process. We already do that. And so we would just, it's more about educating and having people maybe have a better education of the student code of conduct and where it falls within our student code of conduct. That's the tobacco section. So I turn it over to board members for input, please, and discussion.
Are there any questions on this section? Ms. Pritchett?
This is a general question. Was it the group's sentiment that the infractions were not appropriately handled at every school? In other words, it's in there, the policy's there, it's very clear, but that not all the schools were complying with the policies set forth?
I would have to say yes, that there was agreement among the group that things were handled differently at some of our school sites, and that consequences and discipline sanctions would change or were different depending on what school you went to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you.
So what's our resolution on this? I just am curious. Obviously, I think there should be a mandatory parent meeting at the school, not parent involvement should be required. It shall be required. And that there be a mandatory meeting. And
we can look to include
yeah, and
something
if
like
both
that.
parents, regardless of the circumstance, should have to attend. I mean, obviously, that might not be possible always, but, you know, they should have to attend the meeting. They should have to understand the consequences. And if are we going to do a supervised community service within the school? Because, I mean, I would like to know what our principals think of that. And if there is it going to create more of a burden for them to be doing that during the school day? Or if they do that while they're in school suspension for the infraction. So I would want to understand more about how that works.
So also, let me share with you something that we have been working on as a district team. Mr. Delval, who works for the Police Athletic League from Martin County School District, actually, he will be hopefully coming forward to the next board meeting, because there is a program. When a student gets an infraction for tobacco and they get a citation from one of our deputies, that goes to the judge. And so at this point, they would like to bring forward with another layer of a consequence that makes the parent have to do another program on top of what we have with our tobacco prevention program, on top of that, and the evenings. So they would have to comply with some of what we do for our infractions, and then also comply with I guess it was the judge one of the judges had mentioned to us that we met with her, and she says, I can put some teeth into this if I'm able to have the student come forward and give this as an option. So if that can be a second layer, that would be something that we would be looking at doing. And it is the second part of this. After this is the feedback from the community. There are a host of changes that the student services team, as well as I plan on meeting with Mr. Frangella, that we are going to be bringing to you as well, because we do, and also the administrators. Dr. Muto has sent out an email an action to all administrators for them to provide their input as to what are some things that they would like to see changed, and kind of pointing them into our top areas. We know vaping is a big issue in the district, and we know that we have the bullying. And so these are the top areas that we're looking for input from all stakeholders. This just happened to be like the first piece of it, and we hope to be coming forward to you all to discuss all those other intimate changes that need to be done with that.
Any other questions? Comments?
Okay. So the next area was about wireless communication devices. And there was a lot of discussion at the table about specifying a designated area for the devices during instructional time. If I can just have you turn to page 14 in the Student Code of Conduct, you'll see on page 14, number 12, under the technology infraction, it clearly indicates that a teacher shall designate an area for wireless communication devices during instructional time. And so and also it does appear on page 44 as well in the Code of Conduct under the student use of wireless communication devices. It repeats the same sentence. So a lot of having conversation and dialogue and pulling out policy to show them that this is already in effect. The other two bullet points were just discussion about blocked sites and how students use some that are blocked for legitimate educational purposes, and they felt like they were being blocked. Not sure that that would be something that would reside in the Student Code of Conduct, as well as saying that that they're able to get access to other areas. So that was kind of the focus of the wireless device conversation. It wasn't too much dialogue from like the notes that we have, other than these things, and asking questions about block sites, which would be some further conversation with Mr. Adrian if we needed to have that discussion with him. Any questions on wireless communication?
Any questions?
We might get more feedback from when
Ms. Powers?
administrators.
So this whole, a teacher shall designate an area for wireless communication devices. My personal opinion is that we have to curb cell phone use. That's where the bullying, and so there's like a domino effect with bullying. So if we're one-to-one on our devices, I mean, is there a need for students to even have their phones out? I get the safety, and parents want to know that their children have their cell phone at school with them, but is there an educational reason why they would need to have a wireless communication device like a cell phone out during the school day? Unless they were using it with the permission of a teacher in an emergency to call their parents or let them know to pick them up late or pick them up early, whatever it is. It's like this impact with the wireless devices and the phones and snapping photos and inappropriate videos being taken of people without their consent during the school day. It's the things that they're doing go on and on. So I'm of the opinion that they shouldn't have their cell phones out during the school day, unless there is an educational purpose.
And I think if we were to talk about the instructional piece, then I would, of course, look to Mr. LaBarber to tell me some of the practices that right now, and what are some of the reasons that cell phones would be used during instructional time.
In my opinion, if we are going to one-to-one devices like we are right now, there is no reason to be using a cell phone during class if they have a computer at their desk. I concur and I agree with you 100%. If we're going to stick to standards-based instruction, then this should not be using anything else at that point. And all the things that can be done on the phone can be done on this device that I sit right here with.
And I think we'd also have to further look at the House Bill 379, saying, and kind of make sure that we're following the House bill, make sure that we're in alignment with that. So that's something we can definitely further look into.
Ms. Pritchett?
So when I read this, a teacher shall designate an area for wireless communications devices during instructional time, I looked at it as, okay, you're entering the classroom, drop your phone here. That was my impression of what that meant. Is that the intention?
I don't believe so, Mrs. Pritchett. And actually, was part of some of the focus groups with the students, and there is inconsistencies among some of our staff and teachers as well, because for some teachers, there's a parking space for the phones. For others, they don't want to have that liability of holding or having the phones in a certain location. Then there's also some teachers that would say, take out your device and we're going to X, Y, and Z. That
Well,
has been
isn't
some of the
that
things that the kids have said.
incumbent upon the district then to inform the teachers that the cell phone doesn't come out during? Because I like the phrase here, but I think its meaning, when I first read it, it has a different meaning than you're telling me. So if we're going to, in our code, say that phones are not allowable during instructional time, it's incumbent upon the teachers to follow that and not to be inconsistent, such as with infractions for, it seems to be an issue of the teachers not understanding what the policy is and what we're trying to do here. So the kids are only going to do what the teacher allows them to do. Thank you.
Welcome. So would you like to come back with some other language for how this would be written in as a level 1 infraction in the student code of conduct?
Yes. Please.
Okay. We'll look at that.
Why level 1 if we're taking it seriously?
I was just honestly thinking, I think it has to be progressive as well. Like, you get a warning in the first time, and then the consequences get more serious as you move on. Because if it's just a level 1 every single time, there is no incentive not to continue that behavior, because I don't know that it's strong enough.
Yeah, then
I
it's
do
just a
agree.
golly gee, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Golly gee, I'm sorry.
Constance Lafayette.
Golly gee, I'm sorry.
And I think every single time, the parent has to be involved, and at the second one, it's a mandatory meeting. At the third one, it's like in-school suspension. The fourth, out-of-school suspend, like, we need some progressive.
And what you said, Mrs. Powers, I agree with, because the code of conduct is supposed to be progressive discipline. So if we get a warning that first time and we get that first referral at a level 1, and then again, you have a repeated incidence of this same behavior, and we then go to our level 2 and we look, it may come to a point where it becomes a defiance or an insubordination. So there's a way to layer on the discipline. And so I hear you saying a more standard process, like we have the decision tree for the tobacco for the communication, as far as this first, then this, then this, then that.
And I'm fine, as Ms. Roberts recommended, having a more serious consequence as the first consequence, because we're never going to combat this if we don't make the consequences enough to deter.
Okay. Okay, so moving on. Attendance. So this is a section that if you would please turn to page 9 in the student code of conduct. We'll be looking at that. Also, on the left-hand side of your binder, there's something called attendance action steps for the 24-25 school year. And that's on the left side of your binder. And it's very, very light, but it says draft in the background. So they were looking at drafting and making some changes during the feedback session. That group was very, very, very busy. And so if you look to the attendance action steps, you see that we've highlighted bullet number 3, where it talks about the student being absent for 2 or more days, and it says that the teacher will contact the parent and the guardians, okay? So the conversation at the table with some of the participants in our feedback session stated that they actually preferred it to be the principal or a designee to make that contact and call home, as opposed to the teacher doing the initial 2 days, after 2 days of consecutive absences. And so we wanted to bring that forward to you as well. There was also an additional recommendation to add that if a student is suspended, if you look at actually the policy and you see B is highlighted, that's what we're going to be talking about right now. If a student is suspended or has an unexcused absence, they will not be permitted to attend any after-school activities on that day. Actually, that's for board discussion. We'll address this after. So that was the second part to the teacher not wanting to call. They said that it's difficult for the teacher to call after 2 consecutive days, and that if a student is absent and has an unexcused absence, they're not going to be permitted to attend a school activity on that day. That would be for board discussion as well. I'll actually take you back to B right now. So if you turn your page, we have policy 5200, as you know, talks about the teacher's responsibility to take attendance on a daily basis. And in secondary, they do it period by period. So on page 9, that is covered under that section B, where it says teachers shall record absentees each period. And you can see that they're highlighted. One of the recommendations by the group was to add at the end where it says as required by school, they wanted to add to the designated attendance clerk. That was one of the pieces of feedback, that everything would stay the same, but that they would report that to the designated attendance clerk.
So isn't that done through focus, attendance, and so teachers are reporting it in real time. So when they take attendance at the beginning of a period, we know because I have heard stories from people that kids have been absent for 30 days and didn't realize that they weren't attending for that amount of time until the October count. Like, that's just alarming to me that that's happening. So what is the process for then the attendance clerk who is now going to be responsible for?
So I look at it twofold too, because at elementary school, they're with the same teacher all day long. And if you know that that student is absent, being a classroom teacher, your student was out for 2 days, usually you're the first person in the line of defense to pick up the phone and to call the parent and find out why the child is absent. We shouldn't be getting to a point where there's, like you said, 30 days out without somebody knowing. Secondary becomes period by period, and that becomes more challenging for us to monitor, because you may have some staff that takes the attendance or does not take the attendance. And so the way the system rolls, it rolls to, if you have been in session for 1 class or 2 class out of, say, 3, 4, 5 classes, it rolls and automatically rolls to present. So there's a lot of I guess you can say, responsibility on the teachers to know their kids, know if they're in the classroom or not. And so the group was really saying that it was too much for a teacher to be responsible for, that attendance clerks or registrars at the secondary level would be the ones that would start the ball rolling in that direction. So that would be for board discussion. Whether I couldn't tell you whether it would be something that would fix the issue or not. We would really have to look a little bit deeper into some of the attendance, about taking attendance on a daily basis and period by period. So, all right.
Ms. Pritchett?
So some of this makes sense to me, because what is the purpose of an attendance clerk? By virtue of the name, they're responsible for keeping attendance in order, so to speak. So for the teacher to have to do it doesn't make as much sense to me as an attendance clerk. Secondary. Elementary, and I don't want to make different rules for different groups, but I think elementary is more, it's easier because the teacher's with the student all day long. But I do see I do see the rationale for the attendance clerk taking it over after 2 days. I think that makes some sense. I don't know if it makes sense at the elementary level, just my 2 cents.
I had spent some time at that table listening to some of the conversation when I participated with them. And there's a little bit of a dichotomy between, say, administrators and say teachers, where the administrator's viewpoint is if a student is out for 2 days, the first line of defense is the teacher. The teacher's the one that's building relationships with the student, with the parents, with the family. So they're calling, they're making that initial contact. And then as we start moving down into these areas of 5+ days, and then 10, and then 15+, and sending out our letters, that at that point, we need to be involving other people, as you will notice when you have a chance to review this, when you have your field officer. And there was conversations about that as well. Like, we have one field officer for the entire district. We try to utilize the SSSWs to help with that. And so, yes, I would have to say that it may be okay for after 2 days for the teacher to make that initial contact, and then you're right, the registrar, the data entry clerk, they're the ones who see the data on a daily basis. But are they the ones that are going to be calling all of the parents? So that was up for discussion.
Yeah, I think it's very complicated, especially for middle and high school, because a student could be absent 2 consecutive days in their first period class, but be there the rest of the day. They could be there absent 5 consecutive days in their last period class and be present. So it gets a little more complicated with schedules. I mean, elementary is simpler, as Ms. Pritchett said, but I just don't want to put a burden, because we have to think about the workload that we would be putting on one attendance person at a high school with 3,000 students. Is it even feasible for that person to handle that workload?
That was a lot of the discussion at the table.
If I can just chime in. So I agree with everything that has been said, because they're all great points. But I think once the student code of conduct is established and the board has given direction on what changes they want made in the attendance policy, I think part of our problem is the lack of consistency in follow-through at various sites. So what I'd like to offer is that at the secondary level, while I don't think it's the sole responsibility of a teacher to monitor all of that attendance for the purposes that you just mentioned, and I think that was very well articulated, there needs to be extra layers built in by way of the guidance counselor, the grad coach. There's the assistant principal of student services should be running early warning reports every 4 weeks that is specific to attendance, and that they're meeting as a team to discuss truancy among students that are popping within certain periods that have higher absenteeism, the frequent flyers, if you will. If they're having discussions as a team about those students through their early warning system that they set up, now then they begin to look at grades, they begin to look at behavior. There's a whole slew of other things that should be set into motion purely based on the fact that they've identified students that have a higher absenteeism rate by period. And surely, while I don't want to add additional burden to teachers, there is a certain amount of responsibility during their common planning that they have as teachers to say, hey, Johnny's constantly absent in 5th period. Have you seen him show up to your 3rd period class? And if that communication and dialogue is happening the way it needs to, now we're a team approach to make sure that we're contacting parent, getting the right people involved, getting the truancy office involved, student services, and that forth. So I think the board needs to set the policy, the strict parameters that you are moving to adopt, which I think is the right thing to do. And then my team, with the new director of student services, needs to work on solidifying consistent processes that are followed at every school and holding administrators accountable, as well as our school-based teams, to making sure that those policies are followed with consistency. Because you are seeing inconsistencies, and that is a direct result of us not properly providing the training on a consistent basis and holding those individuals accountable for that. So you all have very great points. but I think it's a multifaceted kind of approach, and everybody needs to be looking at it, not just one or two people. That needs to be a team process that we put in place that is followed at every school site.
Yeah, I almost think 4 weeks is too long. You know, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what if a student is absent for, 8 days or they could be literally absent 20 days before we would look at catching it.
Agreed. 4 weeks was just kind of a.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
For the record, we absolutely would be, early warning system would say 3 consecutive days, and you would be on top of.
But
that.
also, to Mr. Main's point, in our school board policy, it does expressly say, if a student is absent 5 days, right, whether it's excused or unexcused, they are supposed to be referred to the MTSS team, the multi-tiered system of support team, in which that whole problem-solving piece that starts to evolve. Parents are invited to every MTSS meeting. And so it's getting granularly really into figuring out how are we assuring, and we know behavior is a big issue, and academics. So if a kid is struggling academically, if a kid is struggling behaviorally, we usually jump on it like in 2 seconds flat. And then when you're like, okay, this kid is absent, but he's doing okay academically and he's doing okay behaviorally, sometimes that might not get the attention that it deserves, but that is correct. Those early warning system says at 2 unexcused days, that the teacher is kind of having that conversation. But then after that, somebody's referring that student, and should be, to the MTSS team. Every school has an MTSS team.
So why are parents just invited? Why isn't it mandatory that they attend the MTSS meeting, at least initially? I mean, they need to understand what their role is, and maybe they need support. Maybe there's supports in the community that could help them outside of school. We just can't know what their circumstance is at home. And for us to better understand that, we can help the parents with their children.
Another very good point that you're making, because we also, if you look at it geographically, culturally, and you look at some of these pieces, you will see that we do have some categories of students that may not, whether it's migrant students, that they're not here for certain periods of time, whether it is that we have students that are staying home and taking care of their siblings because the family has to go to work. So you're right, there's so many layers to this attendance piece. And yes, when we get them in school, we keep them in school, they're gonna perform better academically. They're gonna do better when they're here. And so it's hard, even with having even the one field officer, to cover the whole district. It's a challenge because we do have a lot of students that are out 10+ days. And that is concerning to all of us. So as we navigate that, in the attendance action steps, the 24-25, maybe that is a document that the board would be able to keep and to look at, because there's some color changes and items that were placed in there that would allow for some other monitoring, and about the roles of the field officer. This is some of the things that they were working on as a group.
Ms. Pritchett, did you have a question?
Does Focus have the ability to, flag? Like after 2 days, can it run a report of?
Yes.
Does it currently?
It depends on who would do it. After 5 days? Ms. Harris is saying
After 5 days? Would it be able to be programmed for after 2 days?
That would be a conversation with Mr. Adrian?
Because then the policy would match up with what Focus is doing.
Dr. Muto, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, we currently have, or some of the schools have 5-day letters, 10-day letters, and 15-day letters that go home. So they have it scheduled to run that way. But Dr. Adrian is saying they could customize it however we need it to.
Well, then I'm saying that because it would match what we have in our policy, and after 2 days, whether it's a phone call or whatever is determined, Focus would be able to run that, and it would be at every school, but that means the user would have to put it into Focus. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the attendance policy, as being pointed out by Mrs. Harris, is it starts with the 5-day piece. The 2-day piece is in the draft copy that it was a recommendation by the committee. So in the policy, we start
So
with
if we adopt
the
that-
5-day.
If we were to adopt that, we could change it from 5-day to, we could change it from 5-day to 2-day.
If that would be the pleasure of the board.
Thank you.
So just so you know, as we navigate the next page, you'll see there are some highlighted there's some highlighted yellow pieces, and you'll see the same thing, that when a student is absent for no reason for 2 or more days, they wanted to replace that with data entry clerk at the elementary or attendance clerk at the secondary. And if you bounce down to the second section that talks about 5 unexcused absences or just any absence, the teacher they want the same thing added there. They want it to be changed from the teacher shall report to the data entry clerk at elementary and to the attendance clerk at secondary. So just they're following suit with what they were saying in the previous recommendation, that it would not be on the onus of the teacher to to contact the parent.
Ms. Roberts, did you have a question?
I did. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slides that have to do with attendance, and I would like to ask our superintendent to try to, I mean, some of them are contradicting each other. They're like suggestions from all over the place, but if the superintendent could meet with instruction and whoever and come back with something that's more concise, because I feel like we've got it all over the place. I mean, I feel like what we're looking at is we're looking at this person has a suggestion here and this person has a suggestion there, and I kind of feel like, so as we look at, okay, we can change 5 days to 2 days, and then it becomes, okay, well, is it the clerk, is it the this, and then is it, can Focus do this, and I feel like we're just like,
The policy.
we're just going on, unless you guys are interested in just going on.
So what I would like to propose,
I'm not interested in that.
I'm with you.
Going on.
What I would like to propose is that the next time we come back forward with the student code of conduct, that we would have recommendations for the board with the red line and the blue additions, just the way you're used to seeing it, so that you have the opportunity to weigh in on saying yes or no to what we're recommending.
Sure, but
And we will take all of the committee's recommendations into account when we're putting our recommendations into place.
Sure, I'm specifically speaking about attendance, because I think the professionals could kind of dissect what the attendance piece needs to be, and instead of us spinning our wheels with that, I kind of feel we can
Gotcha.
jump past all. Thank you.
So do you want me to, so what you're looking at with the attendance that's on the slides is actually some of the work, the draft work that you have in your left side pocket. So it's pretty much, there's no changes. There was nothing that you see changed on the PowerPoint slide that talks about administrative responsibilities. And there was no input on the second page of administrative responsibilities and the third page, and also the student services field officer. So those pages don't have any changes on them, but as stated, the information from those slides came from the draft work that they were working on during the feedback session. Okay. So the next area was bullying. And one of the first identified areas of the group was that a lot of the constituents felt that we needed to identify more adults to report bullying. In the back of the book, you have also the policy 5517.01. It says B&H for bullying and harassment. And it does explicitly say, and we highlighted it for you on page 4, there are a few paragraphs, paragraph 1 and 2, that explicitly states that the administrator can take the allegation for a report, that they must report to the principal any allegation of bullying. And any staff can accept a report from a student or a parent. And I believe that our community members may not have known that or understood that that was a process, and so that's why we provided them with the policy. There was also a discussion that the principal must be the person to carry out the investigation once a report had been made, and that all reports have to go to the principal. And they felt like there was not enough staff on site to take these claims and handle the process for bullying. And on page 4, under procedure for investigation in our policy, it talks about that the principal can designate an individual that is trained in those investigative procedures. So it doesn't have to only be the principal, but I believe that the thought out there is when a parent has a concern and their child is being bullied or wants to file a bullying complaint, that the only person that they can go to for an investigation is the principal, and that is not the case. Is there any questions about the bullying piece?
So, I do have some just observations. I agree that there should be more than one person that can conduct a bullying investigation. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be a school site administrator. But what does have to happen is they have to be properly trained. And the training has to be consistent, and the reporting has to be consistent across all schools. So that's really important. And, you know, I think depending on where the allegations of bullying are coming from, who's involved, would determine who conducts the investigation, obviously. So the anonymous reporting piece, I know that can be something that is, there's so much in here that I think the Hope Scholarship piece of it is also very misused, because I hear parents that will say their child is being bullied, and it's at the point that it's substantiated is when you are offered, hey, you can take the Hope Scholarship. And what I hear the most from parents is, why does my child have to move? Why does my child, the victim, have to change schools? Yep. Why is there not a consequence for the bully? Because why do I have to not allow my child to ride the bus because there's a bully that's allowed to ride the bus and it's substantiated? So we have to come up with some sort of solution that we're not punishing the victim. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the biggest complaint I hear from parents.
Then the bully is going to continue doing what he's doing to another child.
Right.
He removed one, but not all.
Some of the work that we've been doing at the district level with the student services team is because we've been having to handle some of the bullying cases when the parent, there was one thing that was asked if there can be an appeals process for bullying as one of the things that came out of the group. Right now, as you all know, we have an appeals process for disciplinary infractions. And so the parent has to first go to the principal, make their appeal, and then if the principal upholds the discipline, then it comes to our district appeal committee, which if any of us were involved directly with the family or the student, we remove ourselves, but we find somebody, 3 people, and Mr. Frangella is a part of that, as well as the other administrators and student services in ESE, and they're able to go through that process. So that was brought up by a member of the committee saying, can we have a bullying appeal committee? And so I don't think that would be a bad idea, because what we do now at the district level, when we have a parent that's really upset because they feel like how can you tell me that it's unsubstantiated? We automatically ask for all the documentation, and our practice is to give the bullying policy to the parent, to read them the definition, to explain to them, because if it doesn't, we explain that if it doesn't meet the parameters of bullying, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It could fall to harassment. And so what we're doing is we've been individually working with site-based administrators on that process and explaining to the parent, because yes, as Mrs. Powers mentioned, they have to then give the Hope Scholarship documentation so that they're able to say, if I want to use the Hope Scholarship. Correct. The victim is not the one that needs to be moved. So we have to also look at the classes that they're in and schedule changes in which, yes, the victim should be the one to be looked at last, not as the one that first moved. We have had parents that say, I want my child moved out of that class. That's a different story. And so there has been a lot of dialogue and discussion and conversation. That group, actually, Ms. Harris was a big part, and she stayed in that group for all 3 sessions with the parents and the community members and hearing all of those things, which prompted us to start those focus groups at Hidden Oaks Middle School, to go through that whole process with them and the layers that we have to unfold with dealing with students' opinion, parents' opinion, staff opinion. We actually have sent out an email to, actually a survey. We've had to send it out twice. We're trying to get parents to come together for a focus group, and we only had one person say that they wanted to be a part of that focus group. But knowing the issue and addressing it, we're able to make better and more effective determinations as to the process and what it is that we should be doing. But we should remain consistent with following our policy, following those procedures, making sure the parent understands their rights. So this is going to be a big piece of what we bring forward to you when we as district leaders get into the student code of conduct and what we want to add in there. Because even community service that was asked for when we were talking about tobacco-free environments is something that we may be looking at, what a form we're working closely with Amber from REACH. Autumn, not Amber. Autumn from REACH, because there are other things that they can, sanctions that can be given to students outside of what we traditionally think that they can give, and one is community service. So we're navigating some of those areas as well, because they have a component for their funding that all students would have to be drug tested, even if it's not a drug offense. So we do have a lot of ideas for how we can deal with that head on. But if you'll look at the questions and suggestions from the committee, they also, that they wanted to know if there was investigation guidance that is allowed or followed by the school. And that's when we pointed them to our policy 5517, and it does talk about on page 4, it talks about the process for investigation and how that investigation is supposed to go. They wanted to have the Hope Scholarship link in the Code of Student Conduct, and we are definitely going to be adding it to, so it's hyperlinked and they can access it immediately. Another question was, are other incidents regarding the bully taken into account, or is each case individualized? And again, in policy 5517 on page 4, item C, it's highlighted for you in the policy that past incidents and continuing patterns of behaviors are noted. And so, yes, I just think these are some of the things that our families and community members just might not be aware of, because not everybody's pulling out a policy. So and we talked about the request to develop an appeal, and I had thought it would be good discussion if the board was interested in us putting something like that in place. And again, about the offender, the change in the class schedule, we do have that as an option under a level 1 infraction in the Student Code of Conduct, under responses and sanctions. And again, I think it's more along the lines of having clear conversations and trainings with staff so that they understand where that falls. Also, the preventative measures for retaliation, they didn't know if we had that. Is that even an option? Is that something? And yes, it is stated on page 7 in the policy that there are preventative measures that are put in place, and we highlighted that for you as well. They also wanted to add the link to the bullying and harassment policy, which is, of course, an easy fix. These are the easy fixes. One of the things I did not mention was they had asked to have the bullying and the harassment policy separated. And that would be for board discussion, since you all are the policymakers for our school board policies. That concludes the information that we wanted to share with you from our community, from our focus group. And so if there's any other questions.
Are there any further questions?
So what I would like to see is, I would like to see how we're taking our current code of conduct and implementing the suggestions or comments. And then we have the comments to go along with it and say, oh, wait, why? Here was our reasoning for not allowing students to carry their badge in their pocket. Like, this is why, this was a suggestion by the committee, and we listened to that, but here's why we believe, what the language would be in the code of conduct. Because I feel like that would be the recommendation of the superintendent. So what would that language look like? And if you didn't take the recommendation, we can explain that why under the question or the issue that was presented, like the Crocs or the, that type of thing. Because I think you can get the gist of what the parents, their concerns were, or even the students and the teachers, what their concerns were. And we can come up with a modified code of conduct and then we can look at it as a board with the comments side by side as we're moving through to see, oh, wait, was that implemented or not? Was the suggestion of the parents that be a level 3 infraction for tobacco? Like, how was that implemented, kind of thing? So that's just my suggestion.
I like that suggestion. We planned on doing that, but what we didn't want to do was that if we started marking up, say, the document, we would have to find a way to maybe identify a color that would represent what that was from the community feedback piece, because what we are soon to bring to you is going to be a lot of other changes that would be more of the district and site-based administrators pieces as well. So we can do that for you. The next one can have all of this in there and maybe one color, and the change, that represents that, and then all of the other in another color. So we can differentiate what was discussed today versus moving forward.
Well, and you can also differentiate if you just say on the comment that, or the suggestion made by the work groups implemented or inserted into page 9 of this section or whatever. That way we know that you did that, and then we can say, well, we don't really agree, or we did want it stronger, or,
Will do.
Any other questions? Mr. Roberts, anything?
I'm good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, we will at the end. We'll give those back. We'll come collect them. All right, moving on to our school board policies. Item number 4.01, policy number 2270, religion in the curriculum. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Are there any questions? Pretty good. Okay, moving on. Item number 4.02, policy number 2371, Hope Scholarship. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Are there any questions? Item number 4.03, policy number 2455, Dropout Prevention and Academic Intervention Programs. This is a new policy. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Item number 4.04, policy number 2460, Exceptional Student Education. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Any questions? Okay. Item number 4.05, policy number 2520, Selection and adoption of instructional materials. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Yes, Ms. Roberts?
So on page 2 of 5 and then on the next policy on page 2 of 10, there's an inconsistency, Diane, if you can check with Neola. One says by April 1st of each year, and the other one says by March 31st of each year, but can you just check which is the one that's supposed to be correct? And then on page 3, under procedure, it talks about, second paragraph, in considering possible new acquisitions, the media specialist will consult reputable, professionally recognized reviewing periodicals and school community stakeholders. Do we have a procedure on how that works? I'm asking the superintendent to.
Yeah, we will take a look at that because, and if we don't, we will put a procedure in place and bring it forward to be attached so that it references this section under the forms.
Okay, and then on page 4 of 5, almost to the bottom, equipment or instructional material vendors, right above that. Free school-related instructional materials. Free instructional materials may be accepted for classroom and school purposes so long as they meet all requirements of board policy, procedure, and state law. But I just want to be sure that
Those
that
books,
you know what that is. So
it would have to go through the review process of the media specialist so that the teacher could not accept those books and just immediately put them on her shelf in the classroom, or if they were donated, they would have to go through the review process with the media specialist approved and then placed on the shelf.
Yeah, just
in
so
the
we're
classroom.
sure that that's in the procedure in whatever it is we're doing. We had an issue several years ago where I think it was some community individual donated some things to an elementary school, and it was oh, there's nothing wrong with this, we can use this, and it hadn't been looked at. So just as long as the procedure, everybody knows what the procedure is. That's all I have with that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Item number 4.06, policy number 2521, instructional materials program. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Are there any questions? Item number 4.07, policy number 2522, challenges to adoption of use of instructional, library, or reading list materials. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations? Are there any questions? Item number 4.08, policy number 2623, student assessment. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations, or are there any questions? Item number 4.09, policy number 5420, reporting student progress. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations, or are there any questions? Item number 4.10, policy number 8420, emergency management, emergency preparedness, and emergency response agencies. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations, or are there any questions? Item number 4.11, policy number 8600, transportation. On page 5 of 7, the recommendation is to select option 2. Is the board okay with accepting the Neola recommendations and the superintendent's recommendations? Yes, Ms. Roberts.
I had a couple things. On page 6 of 7, after the option 2, the second paragraph on 6 of 7 talks about us entering into an interlocal agreement with one or more law enforcement agencies. I don't recall ever seeing that, so we can check and see whether that's been done. That's number 1. And then we talk about signage on school buses that have an operational infraction detection system. Signage on school buses, the things that are supposed to be on the back of the bus. Mark, do you know if that's? It has stop when red lights flash, do not pass when red lights flash, camera enforced, and a graphic depiction of a camera.
I'll have to check into that.
Okay, but if somebody can check on that, that would be good. And then on page 7 of 7, the quarterly reporting to the Florida DOE, starting on October 1st of 2023 and quarterly thereafter. There's a report that's going.
Mrs. Roberts, if we can go back to the signage on school buses.
Yeah.
We will definitely check. I see Mr. Harden stepped out, but I do not believe any of our buses have that
Okay.
device detection.
That's fine.
We purposefully did not order any of the new buses for that, and we're not planning on installing, because that would be an agreement with the sheriff's office that it would be enforced. So if need be, we probably can move to have this section removed, unless we want to keep it in the event that we ever did move in that direction, but we will follow up.
So I think I don't have any problem keeping it. It's just that when we're picking option 2 and we're saying that we're going to meet these specifications if we ever put those detection
Yeah.
systems in, I just want to be sure if we do them, that we
Understood.
have
Yep.
the pieces that are there. And then, so we probably don't have any quarterly reporting to DOE, the last thing in that policy, but if you can just verify that we don't. That's all I had for those. Thank you.
Any other questions? That concludes our policies. Just a reminder that everyone will see these policies a couple more times as we bring them back to board meetings for approval. We will now have open to the board. Ms. Roberts, do you have anything?
Nope.
Ms. Powers? Nope. Mr. Main? All right, this workshop is now adjourned.